Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Fell in Love with Nejire. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
There were three individuals conversing in the 3A classroom. A blond boy with cowlick hair was the first. His face was simple, but he smiled softly. The second one was a boy with black hair who exuded awkwardness. He was attempting to engage the other two in conversation. One of them was a girl with long blue hair that coiled around her waist. She was wearing a joyful expression, and her eyes were in the same shade of blue. They are the three most promising students at UA. The Bluenet asked, Tagata, when do you think that the UA's sports festival for the freshmen will start? She couldn't wait to meet more people and learn about their peculiarities. Her direct demeanor only serves to enhance her natural curiosity. She frequently poses intrusive or unsettling queries. Nejire Hado is her first and second names. With the help of her gigantification quirk, she can send shockwaves through her body and even defeat two villains. She is able to fly with them as well. Nejire's curiosity and bluntness make her even more fascinated by the peculiarities and distinctive physical characteristics of others. The black-haired one frequently takes charge of her. Tamaki Imajiki is his name. He has an inferiority complex, lacks confidence, and is socially awkward. He needs confirmation from others that he did it correctly because he frequently feels inadequate. Mirio Tagata is the other person to whom Nejire posed the query. The leader of the Big Three is regarded as him. He is the most qualified contender to be the future #1 hero. He is praised a lot, but he has a hero-like personality and doesn't let his ideals blind him. He is the epitome of a hero. When he got the question, he turned to face Hado. Tagata responded to the Bluenet, I'm not, but I have an idea. Maybe in a week or so, based on our freshman sports festival. Okay. Thank you, she said. Also, thankfully they decided that the senior sports festival will be held later, therefore we can watch the first years. I'm so excited. I want to see more quirks. She continued with enthusiasm. Imajiki warned her, just don't go overboard, because he is responsible for preventing her from embarrassing more people. He recalled numerous incidents involving the three of them. A few minutes later, the teacher showed up in another classroom. There was something gloomy and sour about him. He was wearing a bandaged scarf and had longish black hair that partially obscured his eyes. The teacher said, sit down, everyone. I have an important announcement today. His hero name is Eraserhead, which is Shota Aizawa. Although he doesn't show the students any affection or anything, he is a very depressing and gloomy person who genuinely cares about them. However, he doesn't express that clearly. Hold on, does that imply that he is a tsundere? For now, I'll let this go. Following his announcement, there was a commotion as the students began talking among themselves. He commanded everyone to stop talking immediately by saying, shut up. As the classroom began to become more chaotic, he added, I am here to say that we will have the UA's sports festival, and so you will have a free week to train. At this, the instructor sighed and made the decision to wait. The thought crossed his mind, this is going to be a pain. A week later, everyone in the class got ready. Now it was the festival's opening ceremony. As the player representative, Bakugo took the stage to deliver his speech. With a straight face, Bakugo declared, I will win this. I will be first place. This made the rest of the class target the entire classroom. The perilous obstacle race around the stadium will be the first event, Midnight announced. They will race to the end, as the name implies. The winner is the first place. In the meantime, it was being watched by the Big Three on the classroom's TV. It was all being watched with interest. Everyone in the class laughed when Bakugo said that, with the exception of Tamaki and Mirio. Mirio saw that he was serious, and Tamaki didn't mind. At that, Nejire was laughing. To her it was funny. I'm eager to see more oddities, with excitement, she thought to herself. As though he could read her thoughts, Tamaki thought to himself, calm down. The event then got underway. Everyone began to run, but when they reached the first obstacle, a certain boy with two colored hair created a huge wall of ice, killing a robot, obstructing the way, and making it easier for him to escape. Interesting plan, Mirio mused to himself. Afterward, the remaining competitors, particularly those in 1A, began to leave. Here and there, a vast array of peculiarities were displayed. Except for one individual, everyone was utilizing their peculiarities. Why doesn't that boy use his peculiarity? I'm really interested, Nejiki pondered as she turned to face a certain boy with black and green hair. Now he was running without his quirk, using only his own, unadulterated strength. She watched as he picked up a piece of a robot. Is his peculiarity connected to metal? As she watched, she thought, she couldn't take her eyes off of him. When a second robot suddenly came toward him, he killed the robot by slashing that robot part at it. The boy was now sprinting in the direction of the goal. I'm positive he didn't use his quirk. Why? Still staring at the boy, she thought. He reached the second obstacle, the fall, after running and slashing a few robots. They had to cross that obstacle, which was a miniature canyon with a few platforms. Additionally, there were a few ropes scattered about. With a rope in hand, the green-haired boy cautiously made his way through, holding on for dear life. Instead of fear, he had determination in his eyes. Not even present. What time is it used by him? Still staring at the boy, Hado mused to herself. For some reason, she was more interested in the boy who hadn't displayed his peculiarities than she was in the other participants. She was eagerly anticipating his peculiarity. Thus, he reached the third obstacle, the minefield, after traversing the canyon. The two leaders were too far away for the boy to see. He had an idea while he was still holding the metal part. Make use of your freaking wit, inside her head, the brunette was yelling. As the other participants glared at him, she saw that he had stopped walking and was carefully caving some bombs with the robot part. What do you do? Now you can't stop. Nejire pondered in her mind. She was cheering him on. The boy received a large pile of bombs after about a minute. Is he acting in the way I believe him to be acting? Hado posed a rhetorical question to herself. He leapt at the pile after grabbing the metal portion. He is, was the brunette's response. Boom. The boy vanished from view as a massive pink explosion sounded throughout the entire area. The boy was catching up to the leaders in a flash, and a streak of pink smoke was seen flying. I really want to see his quirk. A quirkless person couldn't possibly get in here, could they? She reflected to herself. Even though she is extremely interested in other people's peculiarities and physical characteristics, she had never been so fascinated by someone's quirk since she first saw All Might battle criminals on the news. Then he started to fall. But the green-haired boy was going to hit the ground head first because he didn't plan the landing. He and Nejire felt as though time was slowing down. Both leaders were catching up to Izuku. Just before she saw something unexpected, the brunette thought to herself, it's over for him. With a determined expression, the boy picked up the metal piece and slammed it onto the ground, causing an explosion and propelling him farther away before he fell to the ground. Now he was in the lead, chasing the others. In order to move more quickly, the person with the bicolored hair chose to use his ice quirk to create a platform. The boy with the explosive sand-colored hair began to follow the green-colored hair with his explosions. It was too late. President Mike exclaimed, "Winner, Izuku Midoriya, from the hero course," with great enthusiasm. Nejire turned to face the boy as the camera panned to the victor. He won without using his quirk, she muttered, blushing slightly. Tamaki knew that, but she didn't. He laughed quietly and softly. A crush on someone, huh? In order to avoid drawing attention to himself, the black-haired boy thought to himself and smiled slightly. Mirio exclaimed joyfully as he saw the winner smile. Impressive. I didn't see him using his quirk once. It shows that heroes are more than quirk vessels, but instead, they're people with capabilities. Amajiki said, yeah. Nejire's blush was still visible as she continued to stare at the boy. Tamaki jolted her out of her reverie with the words, Earth to Nejire. Hello? Why yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting, she said, blushing shamefully. Despite her directness and curiosity, she will inevitably be embarrassed. Izuku Midoriya is a boy that interests me, she thought to herself, grinning. The big three were conversing with one another after the obstacle race was over. So I thought that the bicolored-haired boy could use the ice from the beginning, and avoid losing, Mirio replied. Tamaki gave him a look. Amajiki expressed his thoughts on the subject, saying, I agree, but the sand-colored-haired boy could keep those small explosions until the end, and actually win. However, Nejire was focused on Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the green hair. What peculiarity does he possess? Oh crap, I didn't give the others any attention. Nejire went into a panic. Seeing her desperate expression, Amajiki attempted to call her but was unsuccessful. Tamaki said, Nejire, come back to us, you're not an astronaut, which made Mirio laugh a little. She yelled and turned to face them in embarrassment. Hey, she replied, still feeling ashamed. Amajiki grimaced and sighed. Mirio continued to smile. As we were saying, What did you think was interesting about the quirks from the first years? Imajiki responded. She replied, oh, the green-haired boy, Izuku Midoriya. I asked about the quirks. Usually, you make a detailed speech about, how cool was that quirk? Oh, I see, someone has a crush, Tamaki laughed at her. Tamaki is socially awkward, but he usually acts that way around strangers. Although he considers Nejiki to be a big, silly sister, he is close to both of them. He does not constantly tease her, but he does it occasionally. Hado reddened deeply. No, she resisted, her blue hair standing out against her red face. Being a tsundere. What a cliché, Imajiki continued to make fun of her statements. She changed the topic and composed herself, saying, I was I interested. I mean, he didn't use his quirk once. Imajiki and Mirio understood that what she had said was accurate after she said it. With his hand beneath his chin, Tagata uttered, after you mentioned it, he didn't. Yeah, I wonder why, concurred Tamaki. Midnight began to speak after that. They looked in the direction of the screen. As a leaderboard with numbers next to each position appeared behind her, Midnight began. So the 42 first places in the obstacle race will partake in the next round. Cavalry battle. The lower the place, lower the points said person has, but there is a catch. The first place, Izuku Midoriya, will be valued at 10 million. Midnight exclaimed as Izuku's face turned into a hardcore deadpan. Izuku was making a hilarious face. That face, Nejire thought as he laughed a little. Following Midnight's explanation of the event, everyone began forming teams. Izuku found it difficult to do so. Mirio and Tamaki began discussing the groups that were emerging. Hado looked at Mirio as she said, and that's why I think that it's interesting. What do you think, Nejire? Nejire remarked, I think that Midoriya will have a hard time choosing a team, without realizing she had mentioned his name. Tagata questioned, Midoriya, the first place? She became aware that she had mentioned his name. Why yeah, was Nejire's somewhat ashamed response. Mirio said to her, I've noticed something, you've been focusing on him a lot. Why is that? After giving it some thought, she responded. She responded to him and to herself, well, I am not sure, but maybe it is because he doesn't use his quirk often? On this one, Nejire is as clueless as Tagata. Izuku was paired with Tokiyami, Mei, and Uraraka once the groups were established. Everyone is forced to pay attention when Midnight declares, we will begin the event in 10 seconds, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start, she counted down. The event then begins. The majority of the groups charged at Izuku's, but Uraraka's zero-gravity quirk and Mei's hover boots allowed them to escape. They flew around the venue, evading rival bands and attempting to hold onto the 10 million headband for the entire 15-minute event. Many teams attacked Midoriya's and some even came very close, but they managed to survive until the second half of the event thanks to Uraraka's trick and Mei's devices. Izuku's team was scurrying and avoiding. Minetta's shelter had suddenly attacked that. Shoji was essentially Minoru's group, protecting him and Tsuyu. Mei's hover boots stuck to the ground after Minetta threw one of his gooey orbs at the soul of one of them. Whoa! Thinking of a way out, Midoriya thought to himself. He damaged one of the hover boots but sent them flying when he activated his jetpack. However, Bakugo noticed this and threw himself into the air, aiming for Izuku. Bakugo was apprehended by Shiro after Tokiyami used Dark Shadow to defend. They managed to get away, landing on a corner far from everyone but Todoroki's group. Izuku and their group were surrounded by ice walls constructed by Shoto, which blocked all escape routes. While trying to think of ways to keep the 10 million headband, Izuku thought, oh no, I can't use the jetpack anymore. Nejire bit her fingernails in frustration and thought, I hope they can get out of that. When Tamaki called his friend, he said, hey, Nejire. Yeah? Was her response. Imajiki went on, truly afraid of his friend's face. See, can you stop biting your nails? It's kinda scary. This look on your face doesn't help either. Her expression was solemn as she fiercely gazed at the monitor. She realized what she was doing and stopped when he brought that to her attention. Oh okay, she replied, pausing her task, when all of a sudden. Recipro burst, was screamed, echoing throughout the stadium. It appeared as though Todoroki's group had teleported to Izuku's team's flank. There was something lacking. The headband! Izuku exclaimed, staring back in disbelief. The heat was so intense that Ida's legs were smoking. No, cried Nejire, leaping to his feet, Her classmates were staring at her bewilderedly when she called their attention. In a desperate attempt to hide, Nejire said, "I just saw a bee bug." "Why yeah, a bug," while her classmates turned back to the screen. While Mirio and Tamaki were about to burst out laughing, she reclined in her chair. But this was something Nejire saw. They stopped laughing when she gave them a back of the head slap. "Achoo!" Iida exclaimed. Somewhere, someone called him a nasty name. Following that sneeze, Izuku's group used their vulnerability from Iida's shock to charge towards Todoroki's. "When they caught our headbands, they ought not to have switched the order." He picked the first headband off Todoroki's neck and walked away from them, speculating in his mind. "Apply your quirk." Nejire was mentally yelling and dying to find out what Izuku's peculiarity was. Midoriya initially had a joyful expression, but she quickly became desperate. President Mike exclaimed, "What a shame." Midoriya's group didn't catch the 10 million headband, as the audience erupted in cheers. "I refuse to give up," Izuku thought resolutely. His arm began to shine as his group charged onto Todoroki's. Little lightning bolts began to cover it, and red veins began to show. Nejire exclaimed with excitement, "He's using his quirk," and the class turned back to her. They wanted to know what was going on, so they looked at the monitor once more, and Nejire followed suit. Tamaki and Mirio were on the verge of laughing, but they quickly collected themselves to watch the round. As Izuku got closer to Todoroki, flames began to shoot out of Shoto's arms. Desperation was evident in the expression on his face. It was Izuku who overpowered him. By opening his palm and feigning a push, Midoriya managed to cover Todoroki's flaming arm and swing it sideways, extinguishing the entire fire. Nejire exclaimed, "Yes, yes," when Izuku used his quirk. She had never felt such intense curiosity before. It was not just tied to his peculiarity, but to him in general. Despite the fact that they had not yet met, she continued to grow more interested in the boy with each passing second. Furthermore, Izuku's move only piqued her interest. Then, it might be the final one. As he reached for Todoroki's neck, Izuku pondered. Abruptly, he blocked Izuku's charge by putting ice on his arm. Bakugo was seen flying in their direction with his explosions, and President Mike shouted, "Time's up," as the event came to a close. Katsuki gave a humorous slam of his head against the floor. Izuku had a dejected look on his face. He desired to assist his teammates in advancing to the following round, but am I only capable of this? I am supposed to be All Might's successor, damn it, Izuku thought, his eyes threatening to well up with tears. However, Izuku blocked them. Then he felt a pull at his back and noticed Ochako staring at him. She gestured toward Tokiyami. "You let me use an opening, so I got it. We got it," Tokiyami said, causing Izuku's eyes to well up with tears. "When you attacked Todoroki," Fumikage said, holding up a headband with enough points to pass. He was sobbing with happiness. The only thing Izuku said was, "Thank you." Nejire was crying with happiness. In between sniffles, she said, "Sniff did it." Tamaki and Mirio gave her a perplexed look. They didn't think she would cry. Mirio said, "Are you okay?" "Tahado." "Why yeah," was her response. Nejire became enthralled with the green-haired boy and grew to love him. "I'll speak with him after the festival is over. I'd like to learn more about his peculiarity," she made up her mind. When the cavalry battle was over, Todoroki's team emerged victorious. Despite the narrow margin, Midoriya's team managed to pass. Nejire wept a little with happiness. She was pleased to see Izuku, in whom she had recently developed a strong interest, win. President Mike exclaimed, "Okay, now we will have an hour break, and small events while it happens, yeah." After taking in those words, Nejire got to his feet. As soon as Mirio and Tamaki saw her, they realized what she was up to. "Don't think about it. He has to prepare himself," Mirio exclaimed as she got to her feet, perspiring. Imajiki added, perspiring alongside Tagata, "Yeah, don't. He needs to rest, and a next-level curious person won't help." Hado simply used her quirk, wave motion, to fly past them without giving them a chance to catch up to her, saying, "Nope, can't wait." She has a strong and adaptable quirk that enables her to control and produce shockwaves. If she applies her shockwaves, she can also fly with it. She was now looking for the 1A participants' lounge, far from her classmates. Each participant has their own private space in that lounge, which is made up of several small rooms where they can rest, come up with plans, or even leave if they so choose. Although the location was monitored by cameras, she won't be considered a threat as long as she maintains a low profile. After all, the level of safety was raised. Nejire's curiosity also led her to know a lot about the UA building. For her, finding the school's building was as simple as breathing because she essentially knew every inch of it. Are you curious? She stopped using her quirk, which was to maintain a small profile, after a few minutes and continued walking until she reached the lounge. Oh, I could ask one of his classmates, Hato thought to herself as she considered her options. Crap, I don't know his room. She gave a mental nod. She approached a door that she had picked at random. Knock, knock. A girl with pink, untidy hair, antennas, black eyes, and yellow pupils knocked on the door and opened it after a few seconds. She glanced at Hato and found her presence perplexing. Mina said, hello, as she tried to figure out why she was here. Hi. Do you know where Izuku Midoriya is located here? Nejire asked Frank. Ashido was about to ask her a question because she was so surprised by how direct she was, but she looked at her and her question again. Is she interested in seeing Midoriya? Mina let out a mental scream. And Mina's face began to smile. Mina provided the right instructions, saying, oh yes. He is at the third door to the right. After saying, thank you, Nejire went to Midoriya's room. And the ship is on its way. After this is over, I'll have to write some fanfiction. Kumufufu, Mina smiled. Hato reached the door of Izuku. It's now or never. Hold on, what's causing my anxiety? She thought about it, but then recalled that she didn't have much time before her friends arrived to drag her back. She hesitated for a second, then knocked. Knock, knock. After a few seconds, Izuku opened the door to reveal a stunning girl with blue hair that began to twist around her waist. The green-haired boy was on another planet, and her deep blue eyes reflected him. Softly, hey, Midoriya, she said. He jolted out of his reverie. Why yay? Wait, how do you know my nom? He began, but her hand covering his mouth cut him off in his tracks. Sorry, but I have to hide from my classmates for a moment, whisper only, K? She was whispering. She removed her hand silently from his mouth and he nodded. The questions she kept asking were, what is your quirk? What can it do? How did you do that against that bicolored hair guy? And coming, 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 and coming. Don't you get the idea? After a while, two guys showed up, and Izuku just stared at her, trying to take in everything she was asking him. One had cowlicks and was blonde. The other had dark hair that was untidy and pointed ears. They were running around, and they came here right away when they spotted Nejire. Panting, the dark-haired one said, Pant, sorry. He appeared to be running in desperation. When he said that, the blonde bowed. Izuku simply stared at them, perplexed. Izuku asked, F for what? To them. Still gasping for air, the dark-haired one replied, F for her, taking your time. Izuku simply laughed while glancing at them. The three gazed at the boy with the green hair, perplexed. Izuku stopped laughing and said, no problem, I already did everything I could for the time being. They let out a sigh of relief. Recalling what Ojiro had told him about Hitoshi Shinso, Izuku thought, Ojiro left 10 minutes ago. I have to thank him later. As Izuku and Nejire started to perspire, the blonde said, okay, now if you don't mind, we will catch our fugitive pet. By the way, my name is Mirio Tagata, nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya, he said, holding out his hand. As he shook his hand, Midoriya chuckled nervously, my name is Osari, you already know. Izuku grinned as he glanced at the person who had been recommended. His name is Tamaki Imajiki, he's kinda socially awkward when he doesn't know someone. He reached out to Imajiki. His words, I feel you, reassured Tamaki. Tamaki shook his hand and grinned. Hey, Imajiki gave an unsteady laugh. The woman blushed and stammered, I'm Nejire Hato. You see can call me, and Nejire. Does she stutter? Thought Tamaki and Mirio simultaneously. According to Tamaki's theory, I think this crush reached a whole new level. Wow, I didn't see that coming, Mirio said to himself. Despite seeing that blush, Izuku dismissed it. It's not feasible. Not at all. Not with me, Deku. He denied that she blushed at him. Following that, they split up, with Izuku waiting inside the room while Mirio and Tamaki dragged Nejire back to her classroom. Then she received an earful. Izuku made a mental note, just 1 minute before the match starts. He therefore went over his entire plan. He was aware of the brainwashing effect and how to prevent it, as Ojiro had explained before Nejire arrived. A robotic voice called out to them, the participants, Izuku Midoriya, from 1A, and Hitoshi Shinso, from the General Department, come to the arena. Your match will start. Thus, they were both on the verge of going into the arena. And now we will start the fight between Izuku Midoriya, from the Hero Course. He got first place in the obstacle race, and showed spectacular use of his surroundings, President Mike yelled. The audience then began to applaud. At last, the subsequent event would begin. President Mike greeted him, bewildered, and welcomed Hitoshi Shinso, from the General Department. Wait, how did he pass? He had no recollection of him. It wasn't President Mike's fault because Shinso used some devious brainwashing techniques without drawing anyone's attention to them, and President Mike was focusing more on the ones that would pique the interest of the audience. Anyway, when the referee, Midnight, signals, you may start the match, yeah, he continued to yell. After giving us both a quick glance and receiving our nods, Midnight announced the start of the match. I'm eager to see more of his peculiarities. Nejire mentally sulked, those two party poopers. I couldn't get any answers. Achoo. Mirio and Tamaki both sneezed simultaneously and turned to face her. She started to perspire as they stared at her. Have you spoken? They both asked simultaneously. She could feel the fear. When President Mike announced the match, they immediately turned around. When the match started at midnight, Izuku prepared his stance and Shinso gave him a smug look. As Izuku became more irate, Shinso remarked, that boy, Ojiro. He was an idiot to forfeit after the obstacle race. Gave up too quickly. He shouldn't be here. Why? Izuku began, but he abruptly stopped. Shinso grinned broadly and said, I won. The vast majority of people were unaware of Hitoshi's peculiarity, and everyone began to comment on that. Nejire said, perplexed, what is that boy saying? He won. The TV audience in particular could hear the microphones placed strategically throughout the arena. I don't know, was what Tamaki said. Yeah, maybe his quirk has something to do with control because Midoriya suddenly stopped walking. Mirio speculated. Maybe, she replied, glancing back at the altercation. Hitoshi commanded, now, walk out of bounds. Izuku began to approach the boundary. Izuku was approaching the edge slowly. Judging from his gait, he appeared to be a zombie. I am unable to. Izuku tried to escape the brainwash by thinking, control. Nejire was observing it and became agitated when she noticed Izuku heading for the door. No, don't leave, she thought. Izuku continued to walk in an attempt to break free from the brainwashing effect. Izuku was making every effort to break free, saying, I have to. Get out of this. With every step Izuku took, Nejire's desperation grew. Please don't give up, with her legs quivering a little, she thought to herself. Izuku continued to try, but his mental state gradually deteriorated. Weary, Izuku thought, I need. Nejire got to his feet. You can succeed, she thought, practically aloud. Izuku was about to pass out when 8 shadowy figures materialized at the corridor's entrance. Izuku abruptly awoke and his one for all unconsciously came on. He noticed that 2 of his fingers began to glow red and release tiny particles of glitter. He surprised everyone, especially Nejire, by moving 2 fingers and creating a tiny crater. This was his way of waking up from the brainwash. What? A crater was made when he moved 2 of his fingers, she mentally cried out, but then she saw that his fingers were burned. He broke them. What's the cost of that quirk? She asked. She speculated, but she soon returned her focus to the screen. Izuku's eyes were determined and menacing as he turned to face Shinso. Oh, you can create this much power with just a flick of your finger? I am jealous, provoked Shinso. For Izuku, that was very personal. He experienced the same emotions as him. He recalled to keep his mouth shut and not answer, and he did just that. Shinso attempted a second provocation. You know, I was born with this quirk, and it is unfair. People judging me because I have what they call a villain's quirk. That struck Izuku once more. He felt like screaming, I know, so badly, but he would most likely be unable to escape it if he did. Without employing his quirk, Midoriya began to charge at Shinso. He wanted to defeat Shinso fairly and demonstrate that quirks are not the only thing that count. He is deserving. In addition, she began to wonder, why isn't he using his quirk? Wow. I don't know what it feels to be called a villain just because of my quirk. Nejire muttered to herself and glanced at the screen. You are blessed. Such a marvelous quirk, for a marvelous hero. Shinso went on. growing more frantic with every action Izuku took. Once more, Izuku is truly fortunate. He wanted to shout, "I am," because he had the same thoughts and completely agreed with them so desperately, but he was unable to. After tending to Shinso's broken finger, Izuku grabbed hold of his shirt. "Go Izuku." Hado pondered. Though he punched Izuku's broken fingers, Shinso was able to push Midoriya a little. In pain, Izuku yelled, "Gwa," while holding his broken fingers in his other hand. Taking advantage of the situation, Shinso spun Izuku around and attempted to shove him out of bounds. "No, you are able," Nejire was yelling to herself. Midoriya reacted quickly, using his broken hand to grab Hitoshi's arm. "Gui!" Izuku yelled in agony, but he persisted because of his willpower and adrenaline. Shinso struck his back on the ground, but Midoriya turned around and saved him out of bounds by grabbing his shirt with the other hand. "Hitoshi Shino is not allowed here," President Mike declared. "The victor of this match is Izuku Midoriya, from the hero course." The arena echoed with applause and shocked noises as the green-haired boy emerged victorious. He beat his opponent without his quirk after successfully escaping brainwashing. Everyone was taken aback. Izuku Midoriya, the winner, beams with joy. In the end, he prevailed, but he has a concern. Hitoshi Shinso, huh? He was Izuku's opponent and shared a similar issue. He was evaluated based on his traits, or more accurately, his quirk, which was the ability to brainwash others. A villain was a common label Shinso received simply for possessing that peculiarity, which he never controlled. Izuku had a similar issue, but he was evaluated based on his quirk, which he lacked. Although Izuku was among the unlucky and unblessed 20%, that didn't stop him. Izuku continued to strive for the title of hero despite being blessed, which only served to motivate him further. He earned his quirk through hard work rather than a natural talent. And after encountering a similar issue, Izuku felt compelled to speak with Shinso, who was at the moment irritated. "Shinso-san." Izuku gave him a call. The boy with the purple hair glanced over his shoulder. Yes. He got that a lot, so Hitoshi responded that he didn't want to hear boasting or even insults. "I take it that you aspire to be a hero?" Izuku asked him a question. Shinso thought for a while, looking for the right words. "I always did, and even though I do, I've always been labeled a villain. This peculiarity is quite frightening, isn't it?" Shinso questioned Midoriya and responded to him. Izuku gave him a quick glance, grinned, and gestured to the group of people now behind him. Despite his confusion, Shinso looked. He chose to approach and listen after noticing some heroes discussing something while glancing at him. Hitoshi was pleased to hear what they had to say. They were complimenting him and offering advice on how his peculiarity was so helpful and how UA was foolish to allow him to enter the general department. Shinso nearly broke down in tears of joy but refrained. His friends began praising him and telling him that he was the star of the general department after he repressed them. This pleased Izuku, and he bid them farewell before departing the arena. Izuku was quite nervous. After all, he was going to battle Todoroki. The prodigy of the 1A class, along with Katsuki Bakugo, is Shoto Todoroki, son of Endeavor. Who wouldn't be scared to oppose him? However, Izuku must get over this fear or anxiety because he aspires to be a hero. However, he has been bothered by the fact that Todoroki despises his father for some reason. After some consideration, Midoriya came to the conclusion that Shoto doesn't use his left side because he harbors resentment toward it. Izuku could take advantage of this opportunity and win, but he wants to save him because he wants to save his friend and comrade. And while in his room, Izuku began to make plans for his match. Nejire made the decision to stop following Izuku because she wanted him to concentrate and succeed, but her friends were still suspicious of her. "Must pay attention, and be careful. We don't want her to run off to where Midoriya is," Amajiki was thinking. Mirio nodded, as though telepathy existed between him and Tamaki. Tamaki was momentarily perplexed by that, but he nodded in recognition. Additionally, they continued to watch the other matches, making comments whenever an intriguing match ended. Even though they were watching those matches, everyone is most excited about the match between Midoriya and Todoroki. It is a match that everyone is anticipating. Despite her extreme anxiety, Nejire was able to relax for the time being. Occasionally, President Mike began yelling announcing after the games. Pres Mike began to announce the match that everyone has been anticipating. The boy who surprised everyone by not using his quick frequently is Izuku Midoriya. He brought Izuku's presentation to a close. And a prodigy and a photo of Todoroki, Endeavor's son. As President Mike concluded his remarks, the crowd began to applaud. The match that everyone has been anticipating will finally begin. The cheers from everyone increased as Izuku and Todoroki entered the arena. Now, they stood on opposite sides of the arena, staring at one another with unwavering resolve. They were going to fight now. Nejire stared at them as she awaited the match's start announcement. She was impatient. She was being consumed from the inside out by her anxiety. After glancing at them both, Midnight asked if they were ready before turning to face the throng. The match will now start. Start, Midnight signaled the start by pointing her whip down. Todoroki threw a massive amount of ice at Izuku as soon as she said, "Start." The ice began to seep through the ground and form spikes. Midoriya. Anticipating this, he lifted his arm and pointed it in the direction of the ice. Then, with a flick of his finger, he produced a powerful wind gust that was sufficient to break the ice and send it back to Shoto. The teenager with the bicolored hair shielded his face from the wind by covering it with his arms. Gwa. Midoriya moaned in agony. However, Midoriya's flick resulted in a broken finger. When Nejire, who was paying close attention, saw the power from Izuku's single flick, she was astounded. Her curiosity was piqued even more after she saw the broken finger. Hato, of course, began to bite her own fingernails in concern. When Imajiki and Tagata realized this, they perspired and immediately turned their attention to the match. Immediately after, they noticed Midoriya concentrating on Todoroki, looking for any additional signs of an attack. Todoroki sent another of those enormous waves of ice, and Izuku flicked another of the 5 fingers on his right hand. Nejire was still perplexed by the sheer force of the wind, which broke the ice again and sent it back towards Todoroki. The same is true for Tamaki and Mirio. Even though it was brief, Todoroki took longer to watch Izuku. Then he launched another of those enormous spikes. Midoriya blocked the ice and broke his 3rd finger. He nearly lost his hand. Nejire bit her fingernails harder, thinking, "Come on, Midoriya, you can do it." Like everyone else, she had a genuine stake in this battle. Many people, if not all of them, have been waiting for this match. Concerned for his own safety, Hato was searching for and supporting Izuku. She has never witnessed anyone cause that much self-harm simply by using their quirk. It is unheard of in her experience. She began to pay closer attention now, feeling that things would change going forward. Izuku flicked and broke another spike that Shoto sent with his right pinky. It was a diversion. Shoto leapt at Izuku and punched him. Todoroki made a path as Izuku was about to flick and ran until he was nearly above Izuku. Midoriya avoided what ought to have happened. Todoroki held Izuku's leg while shooting a tiny streak of ice, knowing that Izuku would avoid it. Midoriya was going to start a conversation, but Izuku made the mental decision, "I have to use all of it." He then turned on one for all throughout his left arm, and Nejire noticed that his arm was changing color. So cool. She genuinely finds it cool that Izuku's arms change color just before he uses his quirk, which she is attempting to understand but is unable to do so. Midoriya punched the ice holding him down as she was thinking this, breaking it with a stronger gust of wind. In order to shield themselves from the wind pressure, the crowd facing Izuku's punch put their arms over their faces. Nejire was even more interested in learning the full scope of Midoriya's peculiarity and the potential consequences. The person most impacted by the wind pressure, Todoroki, nearly got dragged out of bounds but was saved by a wall of ice. He gets up and turns to face Izuku. "Midoriya-san," Todoroki said, adding venom when he mentioned his father, "Thank you for allowing me to show that old man that I can be someone without using what he gave me." Upon hearing that, Izuku realized that Todoroki despises his father and believes that his left side is a feature of his father rather than himself. Midoriya chose to put his classmates' safety and victory ahead of his own, but he couldn't help but feel resentful. Why? Because it appears as though Todoroki is staring down at those who give their all at work. Midoriya was also upset because Todoroki was staring at his father the entire time, not during the fight, as though Izuku didn't exist or was merely a means of demonstrating to his father that he didn't require the authority that came from his own ancestry. "Let me now put an end to this once and for all," Todoroki declared, assuming his stance and sending Izuku a wave of ice that was even greater than what he had done during this match. Will Todoroki use a single mass attack to end this match? President Mike let out an exuberant scream. Surely he has no idea how to calm down. With his eyes wide but serious, Izuku, who had been staring at the ground the entire time, lifted his head a little and waved killer intent. Not being taken seriously infuriated him. "Where are you trying to find?" Nejire was shocked by the tone of Midoriya's voice as he spoke deeply, cutting off all communication, including President Mike. The massive wall of ice was broken in an instant. No one noticed what transpired until... "Is your finger broken?" Todoroki made the startled observation. "Would you really go that far?" Midoriya simply raised his fractured hand a little. "Why don't you give it your all to fight me?" Izuku made a mouth-shaped smile as he pointed it out. "You realize that you haven't even scratched me yet?" Izuku went on, staring directly into Todoroki's eyes. Everyone was listening, including Nejire, and they saw that it was accurate. He had not yet been directly attacked. Midoriya took a deep breath and, "Give me everything you have." Todoroki gave Midoriya a sour look as she taunted him. The teenager's voice was so full of willpower and determination that everyone was getting chills. Nejire was on the edge of her seat, on the verge of getting up. She hadn't been this agitated since she'd found her own peculiarity. She saw Todoroki become irate. "You were bought by my old man?" Todoroki said angrily. "No, simply put, while everyone else is fighting with all of their might, you are only using half of it." Izuku began to clarify. Todoroki waited for the others while merely glancing at him. "My goal is to become a cool hero," Izuku said, giving everyone who is or aspires to be a hero more chills. Something so basic yet so significant. The real desire to become a hero, something that many people overlook. Something that practically no one has, but every hero needs. The genuine desire to become a hero is what the green-haired boy possesses. Izuku then rushed in Todoroki's direction. Izuku babbled to himself as he pushed his right fist into Todoroki's stomach. Imagine. The microwave. To Izuku's astonishment, it was successful. His arm dealt a controlled amount of output, but... Gwa! It didn't help that his fingers were broken. Additionally, he struggled with control, which caused some pain, most of which was from broken fingers. Todoroki was pushed backward, but not very far. And a full-scale battle of attacks, defenses, and dodges began with that punch. Although they were amazed by their skills, the onlookers were afraid of Izuku's fighting style. Why? They were afraid of his will and determination, and every attack or defense he made was destroying him. How could someone have such a strong will? How is he able to endure that much pain? Why does he not give up? Some of the onlookers asked those questions, but since he initiated the fight, the answers to all of them were already clear. Regardless of whether he is injured, destroyed, or anything else, he aspires to be a hero. That resolve is admirable, but it also merits criticism. How can he be a hero if he destroys himself? As she watched all of that, Nejire stood up a few times and was on the edge of her seat. Because of Izuku's injuries, she was extremely nervous and concerned. Her anxiety increased with each punch, dodge, and moan. She felt compelled to keep an eye out for him and defend him. The explanation is straightforward. He easily destroys himself. She doesn't know why, but she wants to keep him in line and keep him safe. Hado begins to ask herself, maybe I care for him that much? She finally came to the conclusion that it was that way, but something happened that made everyone take notice. "You have the power." Todoroki was forced to halt when Izuku yelled at him. Nejire asked herself, what? She put a hand beneath her chin to finish her thought. Is he trying to save his opponent from something? She began to think, and finally came to a conclusion. Nejire came to the conclusion, perhaps he wants to save him before winning. He is an actual hero. All of the people who picked up that phrase thought that and understood it. Izuku prioritized saving Todoroki over winning and his personal security. An action by a real hero. Then, unexpectedly, Todoroki began to cast spells for flames. The person who was shocked to learn that Todoroki had never used that side was wondering why that phrase caused him to flare up. And they were shocked. Shoto's flames startled them, of course, but what really caught them off guard was, "What's making you smile?" Todoroki asked the grin-wearing Izuku. "To assist your opponent in a game. Who is going to screw around now?" Izuku's expression became more solemn as he fixed his gaze on Todoroki's eyes and concentrated on the fight. Shoto shed a single tear, but it quickly vanished due to the heat, as Todoroki's father was seen coming down the stairs, spewing egoistical nonsense. However, they were aware of what to do at the time. Give it your all. Indeed. Without a word, they made the decision to complete this in a single blow. They both took a stance, and Todoroki used both sides to deliver unfathomable heat and chilling cold. In his legs, Izuku triggered one for all. Both of them were exuding a powerful aura of resolve and strength. Today, Izuku did something that few people would do. He put someone else before himself. Then, Todoroki launched a much larger ice streak, the size of a medium cargo ship, which Izuku ducked in midair and flew in Todoroki's direction. The chilly air abruptly became hot. Todoroki was radiating heat, warming the entire area. "Midnight, we must end it," the pro-hero Cementos shouted and began erecting 5 cement walls to prevent them from colliding. "His body is not going to hold," Midnight responded, attempting to stop them with her peculiarity. However, it was in vain because Todoroki was releasing waves of heat and cold, dispersing her gas, and Izuku was in midair. Izuku was coming toward the walls, which had been constructed. In order to cause an explosion, Todoroki was producing a hotter wave, but first. "Thank you, Midoriya." Todoroki said that, and their attacks came into conflict. A massive explosion occurred, and a massive smokescreen emerged. Massive boulders flew as the 5 stone walls were destroyed. The audience was nearly struck by the enormous stones, but a hero prevented them from getting to the onlookers, sparing them. "What is this? It's too powerful," President Mike shouted, perplexed. Everyone was concerned, and Aizawa was truly taken aback. Ignoring the others, Nejire got up and approached the TV expectantly. They heard it before the smoke cleared for them. "Shoto Todoroki is the winner." As the smokescreen disappeared and a boy who was unconscious was seen leaning against a wall, Midnight declared. Despite his extreme exhaustion, Todoroki managed to get to his feet and won. The match was won by Shoto Todoroki. As a hero, however, Izuku Midoriya prevailed. One of the most anticipated games in the history of the sports festival was Izuku vs Todoroki, which exceeded everyone's expectations. 2 formidable opponents engaged in a fierce battle. Naturally, one of them lost. The loser, though, didn't actually lose. Although he technically lost, he actually won. How? You might inquire. At the cost of the match, he triumphed as a hero, saving his own opponent. He put his opponent, Todoroki, above the entire match for a considerable amount of time, even though he had no intention of losing. As you may have noticed, he had the opportunity to use 100% when he first punched Todoroki, but he chose not to. Izuku Midoriya was hurt even though he saved Todoroki by holding back from him so that he could have a chance to speak with him. It hurt a lot, but the majority of the harm was caused by his own quirk, one for all, affecting his own body. Nevertheless, he persevered through it all, putting his own suffering aside and trying to save himself. His own aspirations. Izuku was brought to the nursery for Recovery Girl to tend to him immediately following this arduous battle. He would still have scars from that, though, and not fully recover. Scars he sustained while rescuing others. During the battle, Midnight and Cementos thought, if Midoriya doesn't stop hurting himself like this, he'll probably be irreversibly hurt. Among those who watched the battle, one person was cheering him on. One of the big 3, Nejire Hado, is someone Izuku showed interest in. Mirio Tagata and Tamaki Imajiki, her classmates and friends, would occasionally glance at her, interested in seeing how she would react and why she felt a personal connection to this boy. Izuku eventually suffered severe injuries, and Nejire experienced similar levels of anxiety. She sympathized with the boy despite not knowing him personally, and based on her observations, she can trust him, but on what? Since Hado can produce shock waves strong enough to defeat 2 villains with gigantification quirks, he is an independent person. Immediately. So why? What makes her want to depend on him? And what? Although they are rhetorical, those are questions she poses to herself. She wants to respond to these questions, but she has no idea how to do so. She will eventually correct them. For now, she only needs to worry about the green-black-haired boy who was seriously injured while defending and fighting the same person. Based on her process of elimination, Nejire came to the conclusion that he'll probably be at the nursery. Given his injured appearance, Recovery Girl would have to look after him. She looked up a little and tucked her left index finger under her chin. Her normally serene and calm face was slightly distorted, and her heart was pounding with anxiety. An expression of bitterness and a slight drop in eyebrows. She was overcome with worry. Having made up her mind, she got up from her chair and walked a little more quickly in the direction of the nursery, where she had been countless times. Recovery Girl saw firsthand the physical toll that training her quirk took on her body. This time, Tamaki and Mirio chose not to get involved. She walked for a while before reaching the nursery's door. She wasn't used to it because she wasn't in constant contact with it, but something filled her heart. Perhaps embarrassment is the word. It shows someone who is uncomfortable, self-conscious, ashamed, and so forth. It is typically applied to things that are close to love, which is a sentiment that occasionally goes hand in hand with embarrassment. Did she feel ashamed? Yes, but it's not just that. If he were okay, she would be even more embarrassed, but he is currently being treated, or already is, based on her personal experiences. What is this emotion that now overcomes embarrassment? Be concerned. She still worries about Izuku's well-being, but it's now more intense. She was extremely concerned about his injuries, and that is what she is feeling most right now. For her, that doesn't totally eliminate embarrassment. She gathered her courage and knocked on the door to see if Recovery Girl was there. Nejire recognized the elderly woman's voice as that of the old hero as she said, "Come in." She put a hand on the doorknob, let out a little breath, and opened it slowly. Her eyes were initially drawn to the white of the walls, the equipment, and everything else, aside from a few objects. With a joyful wave, Recovery Girl said, "Oh, Nejire. Long time no see, Over time, she and Hado became friends. Recovery Girl accompanied Nejire on the long journey of training her quirk, which at the time appeared so weak, and Nejire helped Recovery Girl a lot. "Yeah, good to see ya again," Nejire replied with a friendly smile and a bow. Recovery Girl approached a certain green black-haired boy who was sleeping and said, "Oh, wait a second. I'll patch this boy here." Reckless as usual, huh? Hado admired his own resolve as he observed the boy's gentle yet resolute expression. She believed that he was deserving of the title of hero, but a patch. Izuku's PE uniform was taken off by Recovery Girl before she could finish, leaving only the tank top, which was particularly tight that day. Doesn't that require taking one's clothes off? In response, she turned to face Izuku. He had a six-pack and was surprisingly well built. Blushes instantly. Smoke escaped Nejire's ears as her face turned from beige to neon red. Her mouth was hanging open, her eyes wide. Her face had a redness that was like a lamp. She put her hands over her face and, without realizing it, continuously used her quirk to make herself fly. Flustered and embarrassed, Hado's heart was beating exponentially faster. The Recovery Girl laughed when she saw that scene. Youth. She gave the scene a gentle smile immediately after Izuku's patching was complete. When Nejire finally touched down, her face was still barely flushed. She grinned sourly as she glanced at Izuku. How could he be so careless? He takes care of his own body, doesn't he? Is he not concerned about himself? Even though he isn't paying attention, she chastises him in his head. He wouldn't if he were conscious. Recovery Girl became a little perplexed when she saw Nejire's anxious expression. Why is that boy so important to her? I've never seen them together. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but whatever. Beep, beep. A beeping sound caught the pro hero's attention, reminding her that she had more patients in the other nursery room to tend to. Izuku had to recuperate in the other nursery room, which is designated for patients who have been less severely injured. She had a good quirk for that work on her own, so this room was essentially just a better place to recover. Midoriya didn't need this, at least not in this instance, and the school's only option was to purchase emergency supplies. The Recovery Girl said, "Nejire, could ya keep an eye on him? I'll have to take care of some other patients," which caused Nejire to blush a little. She nodded and said, "Okay, RG. Yes, that nickname evokes memories. Hado came up with it, and she believes it to be superior to Recovery Girl's name, Chio Shuzenji, or the hero name in general." Nejire sat next to Izuku's bed and stared at him as soon as Chio left the room after hearing the okay, observing his features. Simple but adorable, Izuku's appearance could be summed up in that sentence. Although it isn't striking, true beauty becomes apparent when you examine him more closely. Calmness and determination, passionate and emotionally charged expressions. It's all in the boy. Something that Nejire had never experienced before filled her up. What is it? She was unable to explain it. It seems as though she was being urged to approach the boy by something pulling at her chest. Her face was growing hotter, showing fluster and embarrassment. Her mouth curled slightly as her dark blue eyes reflected the gentle light outside. However, Izuku's eyes suddenly opened and interrupted her. He had a worried look on his face that was about to change to one of sadness but also happiness. Izuku was indeed content. Despite losing, he was happy to have saved his friend. Results are not nearly as important as someone's life. He saw someone else in his room after he had calmed down. He noticed a girl with blue hair that twisted around itself from the waist forward when he looked slightly to his left. Her face was a little red, her mouth was curled up, and her dark blue eyes were sparkling. "Who? Oh." Izuku said, "You're the girl who visited my room. with a startled expression on his face. She looked at him as she snapped out of her reverie. She felt ashamed at the moment, but she leaned it almost immediately and she began asking him questions, saying, "Hey, please tell me about your quirk. It was so cool but so dangerous." She looked like a child, with her eyes full of stars, her arms flailing, and her mouth moving very quickly. Her speed of speech really surprised the green black-haired boy, who leaned back when she spoke too quickly but was still able to answer some of the questions while, of course, avoiding what he had to. Although she was aware of the evasions, she chose not to investigate further. She may be intrigued, but she is aware of her limitations. And that went on for a while until someone heard the door open. Two people appeared at the door. One was a very strict-looking boy with dark blue hair neatly arranged and glasses. The other was a girl with a brown bob cut that appeared to defy gravity. Her determination and happiness were reflected in her brown eyes. After working with Izuku for a while, he made a decision that improved people's lives. The blue-haired girl in front of them was initially unfamiliar to Ochako and Iida, who were always staring at her and Izuku. It took 5 long seconds for Iida to recognize her. One of the big three at UA, Nejire Hado, has a seemingly super-powerful quirk that allows him to defeat 2 villains with gigantification quirks simultaneously. An idol at the academy as well, she was admired and desired by most of the boys. Desired her. She is not only talented and powerful, but she is also stunningly beautiful. What's she doing here now? She could not be here for anything other than Izuku. Iida struggled for a moment to understand that before noticing the awkward silence in the room. Iida greeted her with courtesy and broke the silence by saying, "Oh, hello. I'm Tenya Iida. Also, may you be Hado Nejire-san." Uraraka immediately came to mind when I heard her name. She's the celebrity I've been hearing so much about. However, why is she here with Deku? Hado smiled and said, "Hi. Also, yes, I am Hado Nejire, nice to meet you." To Iida and Ochako, who was now attempting to form words. She was simply taken aback. Nejire made a bow in return to Iida's bow. Ochako did the same, causing Nejire to bow once more. Izuku was still recuperating from the question session, so he was unable to speak at the time. Oh boy, answering so many questions is extremely taxing on the mind. Upon his recovery, he recognized Ochako and Iida and greeted them. They returned the greeting. Iida asked Nejire in a courteous manner, "Now, Nejire-san, may I respectfully inquire the reason behind your company with Midoriya?" Going too far. The brunette gave the stern boy a look. Her cheeks were softly flushed, ever so slightly. Ochako and Iida were unaware of it. Izuku gave her a curious look as well. She looked directly into Iida's eyes as she candidly responded, "I was kinda, how'd I say it, worried about him. Yeah, I saw his self-destructing ability, and I got worried and curious." He grinned softly, seeing no lie in that sentence. "Okay, but why? I mean, you do not even know each other on a personal level." "At least, not that we know," Tenya responded. She put a finger under her chin and looked up a little. It was clear from her expression that she was giving it a lot of thought. "I don't really know," she said candidly, turning to face Iida. He felt no lie again. Ochako, who was observing the scene, turned to face Izuku and noticed his bandages. "Hold on a minute. Deku, why your shirt?" Uraraka turned around in embarrassment. Confused, Izuku looked down to see that only his tank top was on and his PE shirt was gone. His face flushed so much that he pulled the covers over his head. Fortunately for Nejire, she was effectively managing her own response and preventing the blush from taking over. Uraraka focused more on Izuku after he had put on his PE uniform once more. Wanting to learn more about his overall circumstances, Uraraka went up to the boy, but... Nejire unconsciously used her quirk to distance herself from Izuku. Now that they all understood what had happened, Nejire quickly apologized and claimed that her quirk had, surprisingly, activated on its own. She was immediately pardoned. The unpredictable nature of quirks will not change. They were all aware of it. They all turned to the TV immediately after the entire episode. The second stage of the sports festival's 1v1 battles was about to start. They all made the decision to wait there and take in the remainder of the celebration. Iida eventually had to join in, so he went out. That was the end of the festival for Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the green-black hair. It's going to get interesting. I wonder why I was unable to fully pay attention to everything that took place during the entire sports festival. Nejire was thinking to herself as she reflected on the competition and remembered what she could focus on. But why hadn't she listened? You might inquire. It's straightforward but complex, at least for her, Izuku Midoriya. A boy who attracted her attention by not using his peculiarity. She was attracted to that lack of use, but it wasn't the cause of her fixation on the boy with the green-black hair. No, it was the boy himself that kept her wanting to know more. She felt particularly inclined to follow him, to get to know him, as though she needed to learn more about him. However, she is unaware of that herself. She was currently in the classroom for English class. She speaks both Japanese and English fluently, so it's not like she had to participate. As a successful entrepreneur and the daughter of a former hero, she possessed extensive knowledge of foreign languages. She was dubbed the idol of the school because of her attractiveness and easygoing demeanor, which attracted the attention of the male students. Yes, even though it is uncommon, that non-existent thing is real. Despite all of that, Hado is still a very personable and communicative person. She is the real deal. The so-called reachable flower is her. However, that does not negate the fact that she has rejected numerous confessions. That's Nejire Hado. An idol, yes, a lot. Right now, she's staring out the window while daydreaming. She sighed as she saw the gentle breeze rustling the Big Three's green leaves, which were situated just beneath the third-floor window. As the students either concentrated or paid no attention at all, the sun was gently engulfing them. It was a sense of calm or the beginning of something. One would feel unusually, but not necessarily, exhausted in that English class. A knock at the door was heard during that English lesson. Nedzu, the principal, entered shortly after with his trademark grin. He stood in front of them all, and the 3A classroom echoed with tiny foot taps. Getting right to the point, the principal said, "Good morning, students. Though, unfortunately, brief, I'm here to call Mirio Tagata, Tamaki Amajiki, and Nejire Hado." The principal was obeyed, and they stood. Since the Big Three were being called to the principal's office at the same time, there were some whispers and murmurs in the classroom. Students came up with the unofficial moniker, the Big Three, which is currently very well liked. It specifically targets the 3 students who were summoned to Nedzu's office. Their widely recognized abilities and general experience set them apart from the other students. UA's future is them. Since the principal himself called them at the same time, it is not surprising that there would be some commotion, albeit a minor one this time. The classroom in 1A. A location where the future is being shaped. An environment that shapes heroes. That's where most of the new students who want to be heroes are. At the moment, Aizawa, the unkempt homeroom teacher, was teaching them math. A green-black-haired boy sat among them all, taking notes with ferocity and focus. His green eyes were sparkling with resolve. He had a composed but nervous face. Unconsciously, the tongue protruded slightly. Izuku Midoriya is the name of that boy. All things considered, he is a true and instinctive hero who inherited All Might's power. He is definitely someone to keep an eye on. Even though he isn't aware of it yet, that is undoubtedly what Nejire gave him. Despite being unsaid, Hado was drawn to and maintained interest in his own personality and character. The door knocked abruptly, and 4 people entered after Aizawa opened it. The principal is one of the Big Three, along with Nejire, Tamaki, and Mirio. Izuku didn't notice the people entering because he was too preoccupied with his notes. He was completely absorbed in his own world, learning things fast and generally allowing his mind to run wild. Because of this, Midoriya was unable to hear the Big Three's introduction, which took place at this very moment. There was muttering and whispering all over the classroom, just like 3A had experienced moments earlier. Since the Big Three were present, the 1A's students were quite eager to find out what was going on with them. Naturally, Midoriya was too preoccupied with his notes. After introducing herself, Nejire glanced around the classroom and noticed a particular boy who had green eyes and green hair. Her face lit up with a smile, and her cheeks took on an indiscernible reddish tint. She simply walked swiftly in the direction of the boy because her body was so excited. Her hair fluttered in the gentle nostalgia wind from the windows, each step echoing louder inside the boy's ears. She was approaching Izuku with excitement and grace. With a few exceptions, the boys surrounding the nerdy student abruptly stopped and turned to face Izuku and Nejire, repeating the procedure in an attempt to comprehend the circumstances. When she was in front of the boy, Hado stopped. Seeing that he was not paying attention, she decided to follow Izuku to find out what he was doing. Throughout this exchange, the class remained silent. She noticed the neat, yet rapid, handwriting in Izuku's notes. She followed her gaze and saw the scars on Izuku's hands. She thought back to when she had first spoken to him and saw that he had never had those. She looked closely as she involuntarily picked up the boy's right hand, startling him and causing gasps and whispers around them, as if something were controlling her. She traced the scar with her finger with her free other hand, leaving a soft, gentle sensation from her skin along the scar's lines. The boy's normally pale-ish white skin had turned scarlet red, and he was shaking and confused. For what reason is she doing this? Mentally, the boy stammered. When Nejire realized what she was doing, he swiftly but gently released his hand and began to fume through his ears, turning red as pepper. She simply couldn't run, so she didn't. After all, she's in a classroom full of strangers. Cough. Aizawa's coughing broke the awkwardness and made the principal stop showing his shipping tendencies. Following that, the Big Three gave a proper introduction and described the upcoming interclass exchange, which would involve the Big Three staying in the 1A classroom for a month in order to share advice and pointers because they were more seasoned. Despite hearing all of that, Izuku was unable to stop thinking about what had transpired. He tried to figure out why she did that. Perhaps my scars are that unsightly. The principal smiled as usual and said, "Okay, now that the introduction's ended, we'll decide where they'll sit. They can't stand up all the time, right?" But then he glanced at Nejire and then at Izuku, and his smile became more eerie. The principal approached Shiro, who sat next to Izuku in class, without saying anything. Honta became increasingly perplexed as he walked. "Pardon me, Shiro-san. I believe Nejire would be the most appropriate here, so I ask that you switch seats." "Don't worry, you'll get another one," the principal said, his smile now frightening. After becoming extremely frightened, Shiro grudgingly got up from his seat and stood in front of the class, waiting to be assigned to a new one. Izuku was quite perplexed, but he didn't protest since he didn't want to see the principal smile again. Like everyone else, Nejire was perplexed. The murmurs started after that scene but stopped when Aizawa coughed again. After that, all three of the Big Three were able to secure their own seats. Nejire took Shiro's seat and sat to Izuku's left. Instead of Mineta, Tamaki sat behind Izuku, next to Tokiyami. Bakugo was replaced by Mirio, who sat in front of Izuku. The last one was, to put it mildly, tense. Izuku was seated in the middle seat of the row across from the door, beneath the window, and was generally being sandwiched by the Big Three. The notorious protagonist seat, which Mirio currently occupies, is only one seat away. Then, with his fur gleaming in the sunlight, Nezu made his way to the front of the entire classroom. Despite his diminutive size, the scar that runs through his right eye and his suit give him an air of maturity. The principal looked directly at Izuku as she said, "Now that we have the seats sorted out, I will say only one last thing. Pay attention to the third-year students, and learn much from them. Also, Nejire, Mirio, and Tamaki, pay attention to the first years, you can learn much from them." Then he bowed a little and walked out of the room with diligence. But Nezu gave a contented smile before he left the room. It's going to be a pretty, interesting year. Let's examine the extent to which Izuku Midoriya can impact the well-known Big Three, particularly Nejire Hado. Izuku sighed as he made his way to the classroom. Why must I take a seat in between the Big Three? He hesitated as he approached the door. I'm a little worried about what might occur. He quickly put his hands back on the straps of his backpack and took a deep breath, as though to rid himself of his concerns. Either now or never. The normal chit-chat ceased as he opened the door. Everyone's eyes were on him. Izuku experienced a great number of sharp looks. The pair, Mineta and Kaminari, were the only ones who showed jealousy, but there were also thoughts of confusion and curiosity. Midoriya swallowed. How could I have earned this? Izuku ignored the stares and made his way to his seat, but before anyone could follow him and ask him why he was friendly with the Big Three, the door opened. Can you guess who stepped inside? Indeed, the Big Three, Nejire Hado, Tamaki Imajiki, and Mirio Tagata, are the reason Izuku has been the subject of rumors lately in the 1A classroom. The Prodigies is another name for them. They casually made their way to their seats, which happened to be near Izuku, who was isolated from his peers. Mirio asked gravely, So, Midoriya, how do you feel? Your injuries, I mean. No serious injuries. Thanks for asking though. I mean, only this scar, but that's not important. In response to Izuku's comment regarding his new scar, Nejire instantly leaned in his direction, holding his hand and inadvertently letting her head touch his shoulder once more. Like the heat, the softness of her skin was transferred to his. Soft. Tamaki and Mirio just stared, unable to speak. Everyone was staring at them as the classroom fell silent. Here and there, mixed reactions are occurring once more. From bewilderment to interest to jealousy, unexpectedly, the jealousy wasn't limited to Mineta and Kaminari. Nejire blushed deeply as he realized what she was doing and released his hand. Her attempt to change the topic was successful, at least for Izuku. Yeah. You shouldn't strain yourself to that point, you'll regret it one day, she said. Her words traveled into his ears and lodged themselves in his memory. After a moment of staring down, he grinned. He scratched the back of his head and replied, maybe, if I can't give my all when I need to, I won't be able to call myself a hero. Well, I'm a hero wannabe, so I can't really call myself that. Immediately he raised his hand and shut it. The entire class fell silent as he went on. This scar is proof that I'm not good enough. It is my duty as a student to improve, but yeah, I'll tone it down when possible. Thanks for the concern though. What a real hero. Was what practically everyone there was thinking. Clap, clap, clap. 2 figures came into the classroom. One of them was Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, who wore an approving smile despite her lifeless and disheveled appearance. The other was a diminutive figure with a white shirt underneath a red tie and black vest. Was he a dog, a bear, or a raccoon? You understand. Aizawa and the UA principal, who opportunely overheard Izuku's intentions. His smile was larger than Aizawa's, and he gave a clap of approval. The principal, who was now standing in front of the classroom, declared, selflessness, the true quality of a hero, unfortunately, rare nowadays. You, Midoriya, have that. Keep it up, and you'll undoubtedly become a great hero. Aizawa, sporting his typical poker face, said simply, good, kiddo, you have potential. Izuku was shocked by what the 2 pro heroes had to say. Thank you, was his candid response. With the exception of Bakugo, the entire class, albeit inwardly, agreed with their statements. Nezu looked straight at the boy, who now had a perplexed expression, and said, now, I don't want to take too much time from you, so I'll just do what I came here to do. Izuku Midoriya, I need to talk to you in the principal's office. The boy replied, sure, and began to follow the principal. Unbeknownst to him, Nejire remained stunned and blushed after he left. Whoa, now I'm even more interested. I'd like to learn more about him. Izuku's voice echoed, perplexed, so, what you're trying to say is, I can help Nejire. The principal nodded, exactly. Izuku became even more perplexed. The boy scratched the back of his head insecurely and said, but, what could I help her with? I mean, what do I have that could help Nejire, a prodigy? Nezu let out a sigh. Before anything, just stop bringing yourself down. If you say you're low, even if you aren't, you'll become it. Examine yourself, and improve. Don't be overconfident, or underconfident. Both are bad. Izuku was corrected by the principal. He stood quietly, taking in what had been said. He smiled slightly as he said, okay, thanks for the advice. Anyway, what I'm saying is that Nejire is too curious. Quote, question mark quote. Nezu finished, keep her curiosity at bay, which left Izuku even more perplexed. The boy fixed his intense gaze on the principal's eyes. Nejire is often distracted by the opponent's quirks, so you could help her with it. I know you have huge knowledge towards other heroes and a keen eye for details. So maybe you could satisfy her curiosity, and keep her from holding herself back with that. Obviously, you'll receive extra credit. He continued, now awaiting the boy's response. I trust you in your judgment, I'll try, okay. I can't promise anything though, Izuku said yes. Great. Feeling a little like a cheater, Izuku continued, oh, and I don't really need extra credit, so maybe can I hold on to that? Just when I need it. Nezu laughed heartily and said, sure. Now go back to class, you don't want to lose your grades, do you? Izuku laughed with each other. The green-haired boy said, no, thanks again for the advice, though, and got to his feet. Nezu nodded and remarked, no problem, all for a student, I need to be thanking you for doing this favor. Izuku then returned to the classroom. Nejire glanced at the boy with the green hair. How come I can't take my eyes off of him? Her attention was drawn to his untidy green hair, which complemented his large green eyes. His serious expression complemented his realistically dorkish appearance. He put the tip of his pen in his mouth and considered the question that the teacher had just written on the board, but Nejire wasn't focusing on it. His resolve was the one thing that stood out on his face but was concealed. An inner fire that blazed brightly. He aspires to be the best and to become a hero, to become the peace symbol. Her cheeks became hot and scarlet. She had no idea what was going on with her. That has never occurred before. However, she and Izuku were unaware that someone else was watching from a different seat in the classroom. Dot 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 dot. Why does she blush when she sees Izuku? Since I'm meant to be the one closest to him, I won't allow her to steal him. She watched him. He moved cautiously but resolutely. Her heart was calmed by the breath that came from his soft, yet well-defined mouth. No matter how scarred they were, his hands were as tender as a mother holding her child. In fact, every time she looked at them, her heart sank into a sea of guilt. Even though she didn't interact with him much at the time, she felt as though she was the reason behind them. Like a lighthouse to a boat cruising through the dark, chilly night, the sun smile on his face lifted her spirits. Her opinion of herself changed after he once saved Todoroki at his own expense. She learned of this from Todoroki, who slipped once. If I were in his shoes, would I act similarly? No, I wouldn't. However, he did. The young girl fell in love with the boy with the forest green hair for a number of reasons, including those facts. She pushed the recurring thoughts from her mind and manipulated the pen in her hand, spinning it like a helicopter. She remembered that re-encounter with him, and whenever she stopped, she glanced at his general direction and always found him looking forward, paying attention to the chalkboard. Even after joining UA, his always kind, quiet, and agitated face remained exactly the same. Until then, that is. She saw his facial expressions change over time, from that boy who was unsure and insecure to that man. Even though his expression became more solemn and focused, the warmth remained. The young girl could only speculate as to how his determined and solemn face could be so warm and inviting. She wouldn't mind. In fact, she thought he got even more attractive. According to some, he was plain, bland, or even unremarkable. Technically, they were correct, but if you really looked at him, you could see the characteristics of a decent and hardworking person. It was like water in a bucket, but there was too much of it, and it ended up overflowing. His expressions were always brimming with genuine emotions. The innumerable bone-breaking techniques he employed at the sports festival demonstrated his altruistic nature, which was further supported by the scars on his hands. Conversations were unavoidably present as well, and the girl paid close attention to his actions, behavior, reactions, emotions, and expressions. She was ready to focus on him in class, the only opportunity she had to see him, because she had already practiced and studied the material extensively at home. However, that moment was in jeopardy. Nejire Hado, a third-year student and one of the big three, was the most popular girl at school. She is eyeing him, and she has a gorgeous body, curves, and a sparkling personality. A dark emotion surfaced in the young girl's heart, jealousy. Naturally, she wouldn't go to extreme measures, like murdering or anything similar, to win Izuku. She simply felt uncomfortable and truly bad. She was saddened by the blue-haired beauty's friendliness and, more importantly, by how close she had recently become to Izuku. The girl's only option was to fear losing him, but she refused to. That's what she had planned, anyway. Reeing. The observer spotted a chance as the bell rang in the drowsy students' ears and they were starting to leave. Izuku was standing directly in front of the big three, who had an appointment to attend. She walked politely in the direction of the green net, putting one foot in front of the other. Every step she took was followed by the rapid tapping of her feet against the solid, rigid floor beneath them. When she arrived at her destination, she paused directly next to Izuku at the chair's perimeter. When he saw her, he turned his head in her direction while maintaining a normal expression. A smile appeared on his face as he turned fully toward her. The girl said, "Hello, Midoriya," in a sweet, honey voice. He enjoyed the atmosphere of diligence and concern that filled his ears. Although less formal and dignified, his mother's atmosphere was comparable. "Hey, Yaoyorozu." A young boy with green hair worked on the beach, somewhere on the city's outskirts. His muscles throbbed in excruciating pain, screaming for assistance. His hair was damp, and he dripped sweat onto the thick, raspy sand. There were a few broken refrigerators, ruined televisions, car tires, microwaves, and other items all around him. The once famous beach was covered in a jumbled heap of trash. It was once used for family vacations or dates by couples, but that was years ago before a business decided to dispose of a comparatively small amount of trash there. People eventually started throwing trash there as well. A tiny space away from the water was once dominated by bubblegum wraps. It became a dump after one thing led to another. A dump that is unlawful. As All Might requested, Izuku was also training there. He had been working for 7 months, and he was already experiencing some improvement. His legs were stronger and his arms more rigid. His brain's cognitive function was also enhanced, which he could use in the myriad of scenarios that could put Izuku or anyone he knew in danger. After all, being a hero is no easy task. He was working out as usual when a girl came by, crying silently and with tears in her eyes. Seeing her out of the corner of his eye, the green net turned toward her at once. There was worry on his face, even for someone he didn't know. The boy stopped running toward her and turned to face her. She was a pretty girl with raven hair. Her face was partially obscured by her untied hair. Her age was close to his own, he could infer, but it made no difference. He slowed as he approached and called her. He yelled, "Hello, black-haired girl." But all he got in return was a terrified expression. Although he was unable to see her features, he was able to discern her feelings. He introduced himself, holding his hand in front of her, and said, "Izuku Midoriya, in fact, I'm not here to hurt you." She looked into his own emerald eyes and assessed him. She looked at him for a few seconds before reluctantly shaking his hand. "Raven, I can't just go out on the street and say my name and last name. My family is extremely wealthy." Ignoring the lack of presentation, he recalled, "Nice to meet you. Oh yeah? Do you need any help?" He lowered his voice in fear at every word, saying, "Sorry if it's personal. I was just, trying to help." He was aware that such a conversation with a stranger could be frightening and perplexing. She assessed his behavior first, giving herself a faint blush, hardly enough to qualify as such. Actually, she pointed out to him, "I am not useful." All Izuku could do was tilt his head in perplexity. My quirk," she clarified, gesturing with her hands. The boy truly felt bad about that statement. He was bullied, ignored, and shunned all his life because he didn't have a quirk. Sorrow escaped his eyes like the bucket overflowing, but the girl saw it. Are you?" Avoiding the question, he said, "Sorry, could you show me your quirk?" Raven didn't probe further after realizing it was a sensitive topic. She shook her head no in response to his inquiries. Knowing it would be difficult to assist, Izuku sighed but refused to give up. Since he was a stranger to her, he was more cautious in his word choice and asked, "Could you try to explain it?" Trying to think of a nice way to explain her problem to him, the girl put her hand under her chin and looked down. But why was she speaking normally to a stranger like that? A stranger was about to learn about her personal issues. She looked back at him and saw a soft smile on his face. He was so honest that his eyes did not conceal any lies. As though he were a close relative, a boyf, or even a lifelong best friend, she felt comfortable speaking with him. What on earth was she thinking? On a first meeting, something along those lines. If she had considered such a thing, she was simply insane. Perhaps all people are insane after all. Dissipating her thoughts, she turned to face him and described her predicament, revealing her lack of self-confidence and resolve. He said something like, "That is up to you to find." But surprisingly, he didn't ignore her. Or, "I'm not able to assist you with that." In fact, he gave her a smile and shared some of his experiences with her. He offered her guidance, pointers, and things that would truly be helpful. He was able to assist her because he had also been lacking in ambition and resolve for a while. With a solemn smile, Raven bowed to him after the entire conversation. She simply said, "Thank you," and nothing else. However, the green net was deeply grateful for those words. His disposition improved, and he went to the beach to resume his training. "Wait a second, I talked to a girl, Momo." Raven Yaoyorozu dismissed her recollections. They then struck up a cordial discussion, covering subjects like, what is the most powerful quirk in class, who was the strongest of the big three, etc. And Momo felt closer to Izuku for a brief moment. Izuku trained in the morning nearly every day. He went to the school gym and simply worked out as usual. He knew that the road to becoming a hero or even the symbol of peace wasn't an easy one, and that he still needed to train to get in shape and unleash more of his quirk's potential even after inheriting one for all. He pushed himself harder and harder each day because of this. He initially vomited, grunted in agony, experienced sore muscles for days, and more, but he persisted. He never gave up, not even in the face of his mother's worried inquiries or the worry that some others had for him. But in order to stand where they were and where he desired to be, he had to endure more suffering than anyone else. Izuku's quirk was the result of intense, gut-wrenching training and effort rather than luck, his birth, or any quirk marriages. Then he appeared. UA Academy, Japan's most renowned institution pertaining to heroes, is the top school for aspiring heroes. UA became the prime target for those aspiring to be heroes because of the abundance of professional heroes who taught there and the government's strong support. In addition, he was the disciple of All Might, the #1 hero, and even inherited his quirk. He felt he didn't deserve anything, much to the dismay of All Might, who had told Izuku that he earned everything on his own. Izuku shrugged and returned his attention to the punching bag, as he usually does. He was still getting used to this new regimen, which included boxing and taekwondo as well as some physical endurance exercises, and his hands were calloused from his training. At 5 in the morning, he was alone at the gym. He loved and often yearned for that peaceful seclusion. He needed that alone time after spending so much time juggling his studies, training, and social life. Being an introvert, he would be depleted after a lengthy period of interaction. He enjoyed being by himself. It was like recharging the battery. Additionally, he could concentrate less on the concerns, difficulties, and problems of his academic life if he had a punching bag. The bag was pushed away with each punch, but gravity always brought it back to its original position. Izuku accepted the challenge of defeating the bag. He struck the sandbag with such force that it repeatedly bounced back. With that straightforward set of fundamental moves, jab, cross, hook, and uppercut, he grew accustomed to the boxing style over time and naturally started incorporating it into his hero training. As he performed the movements more and more, a smile spread across his face and his steps grew faster. He always had the drive and resolve to become a hero, and that was all that was visible in his eyes. Izuku's moves only grew more rapid as the bag was pushed back more and more, but even at that point, they were sloppy and he was still a beginner. He attacked without putting up any defenses. That didn't matter to him at the time, though, because he and the bag were dancing rhythmically back and forth. Sweat was dripping violently and erratically onto the floor as the intense waltz of training continued to intensify. He went one step farther. The bag started to make loud thumping sounds as it touched the ceiling to which it was attached. He went into his madman state, breaking his stance entirely. He punched more forcefully until thump. Izuku experienced the thrill of victory for a brief moment after the bag collapsed, spilling its contents onto the ground. As he gasped for air, he thought aloud, "I should have paid more attention to my stance." He overreacted and neglected his training, which negated the intent of his entire altercation with the bag. He squatted with his hands on his knees, gasping for air, his lungs barely full. He got his oxygen back, got back up, and surveyed the mess he had created. He winced at that moment and was quite afraid that he would be punished by damaging school property. At least he had to clean it up. But before he could do anything, he realized how sweaty he was. His hair was even messier, and his shirt was stuck to his back like a leech. Izuku checked his surroundings to make sure he was alone. Then, using both hands, he caught the hem of his shirt and yanked it off, leaving him without a shirt. Izuku actually covered himself while changing the boy in the changing room because he didn't like being shirtless. Due to his mother's ongoing concerns when he reached puberty, he had never felt at ease being partially nude in public. Stretching, he put the shirt on his backpack. Izuku was a really toned body, not the skinny nerd one would expect. Though it wasn't intentional or anything, his training had paid off because his body had changed in addition to his skills. Izuku had been a weak nerd, but All Might's schedule had made him a strong, toned man. Izuku picked up a broom after his stretch and started cleaning up the mess he had created. "Wah," came a very low voice from outside the gym. Nejire stood staring at the Izuku without a shirt. Her ears blazed like embers, and her face was awash in red. All she could see was the boy's body. She had never even considered the possibility of a bulky Izuku because he always gave off a shy and nerdy vibe. She could only look because she was hazy and unable to think clearly. He looked so strong at the time. She knew he had some physical strength, but not to that extent, despite observing his introverted personality, shyness, and selfless actions. Izuku was careful not to leave a mess after cleaning the floor. Izuku took the initiative and took action, whereas most people would just call for help or leave it to the janitor. On the other hand, Izuku developed that while attending UA. That was only made clear by his battle with Todoroki. Admiring his behavior, Nejire continued to search. Her heart pounded like a concerted band against her chest as she gripped it tightly. She wasn't immediately drawn to Izuku's physique, skills, or deeds. It was something invisible, unexplainable, and enigmatic. No genuine motive, no apparent reason. Izuku was entangled with her like a spider's web. Nothing could adequately describe the sensation in her heart, the rhythmic pounding in her chest, or the red-faced kiss. Someone could describe it, but they couldn't explain it. She was still staring at him, but her gaze was fixed on one spot above all others, his eyes. They were stunning, immaculate emerald ones. The pair, who were somewhat round and the epitome of gentle, were glimmered with tenderness and care. She may have been alerted by his body, but it was merely the catalyst for what was already building. She had been staring at him since the sports festival. She was deeply concerned about his struggle with Todoroki, the person with the bicolored hair. Her heart was etched with the memory of that first meeting with him. Even though he was a freshman, less popular, unattractive, marred, overly self-conscious, and full of flaws, he was still Izuku, and that was all she needed on that day. She was beginning to understand those things. She was curious, but she wasn't slow, stupid, or dense. She was intrigued by his peculiarity, of course, but she was also intrigued by something new, something she had never encountered before. Even the smallest things, to which she would not have previously paid attention, piqued her interest. Which color is his favorite? Which food is his favorite? What appeals to him? Does he like a particular show? Additionally, the questions kept coming in. She had never piqued anyone's curiosity or interest so much before. She might not have known him for a long time or had many conversations with him. It's possible that she didn't have a history with him or anything. But she was powerless to stop it. Nejire put her other hand over her heart and kept staring at him. Time paused in that moment. Even if it was just for her, it still happened. At that moment and location, she was connected, utterly enamored. He wasn't a prince, wealthy, or someone she had known for a long time. But, I love him, she told herself. She closed her eyes and gave a gentle smile, finally turning her head away. At last, the trigger was pulled with a ridiculous justification for seeing his body. She loved him despite the fact that she had no reason to do so. From that moment on, her curiosity only increased. The pupils were dispersed throughout the room, interacting and conversing with one another from time to time. The room was filled with the chatter of their conversations and the vibrancy of the youth they were all experiencing. After a few weeks, both 1A and the Big Three had adjusted to the class. However, after the sports festival, only the usual classes and a few theoretical introductions to hero studies took place. However, Nejire seemed quieter than normal to Mirio and Imajiki. She seemed to be thinking about something else, perhaps a plan, because her eyes were strangely blank and unfocused. Nejire simply cut herself off from everyone else and worked on autopilot after deciding one day to train at the school gym. The other two Big Three members simply became perplexed and dismissed it. As Mirio whispered to Tamaki, though, when is she coming back to herself? The subject of Nejire's actions was brought up in the course of their informal conversation. Tamaki shrugged, I don't know. Look, I know that there are some times that her curiosity breaks through the roof, though I've never seen the opposite happen. Me neither. The black-haired senior was less talkative. He felt that he could freely express his opinions, talk to Mirio and Nejire, and, surprisingly, tease Nejire whenever he had the chance. He started doing that out of instinct as she gradually became the sister he had never had. But since he was socially awkward around people other than his two friends, that could only happen to them. Mirio led his siblings to success and safety, much like a good brother would. He was the lighthouse, and they were the boats in the world's darkness, and Nejire and Imajiki followed and had complete faith in him. He shrugged his memories and kept thinking about Nejire's actions. How odd that she, of all people, would be so considerate in a typical circumstance. She would typically just act in a certain way until something intriguing occurred, after which she would keep asking questions until her curiosity was satisfied. When she first saw Izuku, His lack of use of his quirk caught her attention. After that, something kept drawing her in, repeatedly, or at least that's what he believed until that point. His train of thought was interrupted when the door opened. The class fell silent, and everyone was seated in their proper places and acting appropriately, as if the president had arrived. "Class, I have an announcement," said the unkempt man, Aizawa. Although he was a good teacher and showed concern for his students, he was extremely strict. His teaching methods were typically rigorous, but effective. The classroom turned into a zoo mess. He anticipated that, as he always did when he introduced something new to the class, but he didn't allow it to happen. "Shut up," the teacher said, and the class fell silent. "After we gave you enough time to rest from the sports festival, we thought that we would spice things up a notch." The former zoo mess then transformed into something unearthly. Even Iida was struggling to maintain his composure. Anticipating that too, Aizawa used his quirk to silence them all by kicking the ground. Everyone in the class sat down and shifted around in their chairs, anticipating the information. Anyways, we're having a battle royale. Since villain groups could clash mid-hero duty, and the battleground of such battles would become a mess, villain versus hero, we decided on doing that. Before things got any worse, he continued. With this exercise, you will train your teaming up capabilities in large scales. Also, the big three will participate normally, as to simulate stronger enemies, and to not waste their stay in our class. He glared at the class as soon as he finished the explanation. Except for Mineta, who got a classy tongue slap from Suyu, they all clearly understood. His short beard was scratched. "You will be placed under teams of 2 people, as personally selected by the principal," he said. "Since everything is still getting ready, tomorrow will be the day the assignment will happen. Until then, rest up, or strategize." A brief series of rhythmic taps followed Aizawa's explanation of the fundamentals of the task at hand. The door then opened once more, revealing the principal in his typical black vest and white button-up shirt. He exclaimed with delight, "Hello," to the classroom. As might be expected, their responses were typical. Even in the podium, the principal was still quite short. Nezu approached Aizawa, and they switched places, though the unkempt teacher returned to his favorite, caterpillar, sleeping bag. He observed how the students responded. "I am here to inform you of the teams in this activity," he said. They were impatient and twitchy. As the principal continued to smile, they gazed at him expectantly. "Oh yeah, since there will be 23 participants, with Nejire, Amajiki, and Mirio, there will be an odd man out. For fairness purposes, Mirio will be it." The principal turned to look at Mirio, who had a startlingly gleeful smile on her face. Fear and uncertainty dominated the class. Disregarding the abrupt shift in mood, Nezu proceeded to the chalkboard and wrote the names of the teams. Bakugo Katsuki and Shiro Honta, Ochako Uraraka and Tamaki Amajiki, Tenya Iida and Toru Hagakuri, Asui Suyu and Shoji Mezzo, Momo Yaoyorozu and Shoto Todoroki, Jiro Kyoka and Tokiyami Fumikage, Hato Nejire and Midoriya Izuku, Denki Kaminari and Koji Koda, Mashirao Ojiro and Rikido Saito, Aoyama Yuga and Kirishima Eijiro, Minoru Mineta and Mina Ishido, Tagata Mirio. The principal returned to the middle of the podium after the final chalk stroke and looked at each student. Nezu opened his little fluff hands and his eternal smile expanded. "I advise you to try and use your quirks, abilities, and everything in your reach together. Teamwork is key. I also take it that the pairings are somewhat unusual, so there will be no classes for today. Use strategies and all the tricks you can perform," says Nezu. "I wish you the best of luck, and may the best win." Hard eyes and determined smiles were plastered on the students' faces. They were all aware that they needed to plan and win. No, you can't win a battle royale by using brute force. Strategies, traps, vision, and, in this instance, teamwork are all necessary. No matter how strong you are, you're doomed if strategy overtakes you. Sun Tzu, a Chinese military strategist and general, famously said, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." Therefore, use the head instead of pure quirk strength. Of course, a strong quirk can be used as a stronger tool rather than a weaker one, but that would be invalid depending on the situation. If a person with a trap-making quirk were to successfully set all of his traps on a battlefield that permitted it, the person with a stronger quirk, if unprepared, would be crushed. The art of war is that. Naturally, as one might anticipate from 15-year-olds, not many of the students in the class possessed that mindset. However, a few of them did. They may have read the writings of Sun Tzu or other strategists in a history class at some point in their lives, or they may have just been curious about the strategy itself. Even though they were actually few, that alone gave them an advantage. Nejire, who was seated to Izuku's left, exclaimed excitedly, "Hey, Izuku! Do you want to make a plan regarding the whole assignment?" With an unusually certain gaze, the green net gazed into her pristine sky-blue eyes and said, "Yes, I've already planned some of it though. Do you want to hear what I have in mind?" She nodded and moved her chair closer to Izuku. He was in focused Izuku mode, so he was not aware of how close she was to him or the hairs that brushed softly across his shoulder. Izuku was a strategic thinker who was driven to succeed at the time. Nejire was impressed by his resolve. She had only ever seen the fierce adversary and resolute student in his eyes during the sports festival or when he had to win. However, she had also observed that he was not very good at something. He injured himself excessively. Every time she looked directly at his hand, the scars there taunted her. It wounded her to see someone so young as she was accept something like that as normal, even though she might not have had any control over it. But once more, being a hero was a risky business, and he decided to follow that path alone. She found it kind of funny how his eyes would sparkle whenever he had hero studies. In any case, she was aware that he was content with his work. They started to plan after she threw her thoughts aside. He saw her eyes, the eyes of a romantic partner, and it caused him pain. He didn't know why, but he wanted to be the object of that gaze. Perhaps she said something. Did she do something? What did she look like? He wanted to, but he didn't know that. He had, to put it mildly, very little contact with her. Even if he wanted to, he had no reason to speak to her. However, something he had never experienced before was sparked by the way she looked at him and her desire to be nearer to him. His heart burned as his chest gripped it desperately. It hurt from the inside out, as if magma had replaced all of his blood cells. He didn't know, he couldn't know, even though those things had only recently crossed his mind. He had never used it before. However, perhaps, just possibly, in this assignment. In one way or another, he could try to calm that burning sensation in his chest. The moment had come. The royale would make use of all the tactics the students developed and the training they had to maintain. The majority of the students were ready for it. Since they couldn't go empty-handed against so many other people, they had taken their time to consider their options. They benefited from being in a duo and had the chance to combine their individual eccentricities. Izuku considered the various combinations that the others might try. He might have had 1,000 ideas, of course, but anything could happen while working on the project. He gripped his hand tightly as he peered out over the field. Ground Gamma, a makeshift labyrinth made up of innumerable factories, industrial tubes, and haphazardly positioned but useful platforms. Indeed, a location fit for a battle royale. He also looked at the other pupils, who were all waiting for the signal to go off so that the activity could begin. Nejire was standing there, intent. Additionally, she assisted Izuku in creating their own plans. She was also a little confused by Izuku's primary recommendation, the strategy they intended to implement. It was a straightforward idea that increased their options and resilience. She was still shocked, though. The bell chimed, surprising everyone, and there was no countdown, just like in the entrance exam. The sudden clamor of the boisterous students, who hurriedly attempted to carry out their individual plans, caused birds to flock away. Nejire nodded resolutely, looking into Izuku's eyes. This was going to be theirs. Recognizing the signal, the boy stood on the ground, looking only ahead, like a track runner. When Nejire touched the ground, it shook and the buildings closest to them shook as well. Shortly after, Izuku was launched high into the air when the ground beneath him collapsed. Nejire appeared behind him, changing their course in midair. Naturally, they had no idea what the arena would look like beforehand, but they did know what they needed to do. They would benefit from the situation, particularly Izuku, who was unable to effectively manage one for all. Far below them, the ground zipped by in a blur. They marveled at that incredibly different situation for a moment. However, that was not possible. Izuku noticed a rather tall building and realized that they would probably benefit from it. He indicated the location and started scanning the area for any indications of people. Nejire-san, to the right there is a good place to land, he said. They made a gentle thud on the metal surface as they safely landed after assessing the area. Nejire, crouching on top of the roof and looming over the arena, remarked, "This training would be useless if we stay put, even if they don't find us. We can't go rushing. It wasn't large or small. I agree. Izuku crouching next to her, he put a hand under his chin. I think we should stealthily advance through the place, and take out a group at a time, he replied coldly. She glanced over her shoulder at him briefly. Looking back at the ground beneath them, she said, "You're quite cunning, huh?" "Oh," he stammered rapidly. He blushed slightly and said, "I just like strategy books, Sun Tzu's works are really good." "That's nice." She grinned and started to study her environment. When they revealed Mina's partner, Mineta, Mina was a little disappointed. The entire classroom's anything perverted, was connected to everything he did. And everyone knew those things, including her. Even though they both had to work together for the time being, he came to UA for his own reasons, and regardless of how blatant they were, who wouldn't want to be seen as cool, it didn't alter the reality that he gained admission to that elite school. But if he wanted to win, he needed to get in shape. And that's what they were both doing prior to the assignment. Mina gave Mineta stern advice to concentrate. Nevertheless, each had their own peculiarities. He had a simple, seemingly pointless peculiarity. His hair was made up of sticky, purple balls. She had a really strong acid that could be thrown at anything. They initially appeared to be a very unlikable pair in terms of quirks, but Mineta, throw some here. On it. Both of them had the upper hand. Mineta could set strategically placed traps, and Mina could set them off by destroying the terrain, so the arena was ideal for both of their peculiarities. Even though Mina had an unusually high affinity for sports, they were below the average competitor on an individual basis. However, they were comparable to the other competitors if they combined both of their peculiarities and gave themselves permission to concentrate. "Ho!" Suddenly a rather sly voice spoke up. "Interesting. Using your quirks and making traps, huh?" Mineta asked abruptly as he felt his feet slip away. He was above the ground and below the sky. He caught a glimpse of the person holding him by the feet out of the corner of his eye. The great boy felt a surge of dread in his heart. Desperately, his heartbeat pounded his thorax in an irregular rhythm. It was instinctual. Mina was powerless to stop it. Mineta paused. The gleam in his eyes was ruthless. Their brains were invaded by a pressure they had never experienced before. Their veins were bubbling with adrenaline. "I must leave this place." At the same time, they thought. But Mineta was a blur before a single muscle moved, and she hit the ground with her stomach in front of her. He gasped and let his saliva drip out as the oxygen inside suffocated him. He had never experienced such physical agony. Mina's expression twisted in desperation. They couldn't lose like that, so early. Her muscles were powered by adrenaline, and she hurled a large stream of acid in front of her with the intention of striking the monster-like foe. He abruptly turned his head toward her and started to walk. However, the acid struck him, giving Mina an advantage. Why? She was unable to comprehend it. If you ignored the eccentricities, her aim was among the best in the class. She had a great deal of aim training. What happened to my acid? He didn't want to waste much time, so his steps came steadily closer. In this battle royale, he had other targets. He just got hit by my acid. The acid passed through him like a dolphin returning to the water, akin to an in-game glitch where an attack doesn't register. He passed through the earth before she could set up another stream. Like a shark, only his head was visible. He quickly seized Mina's feet and pulled her up above his head as he emerged from the hard ground. She lost her own equilibrium and was powerless to stop him. She spat out her saliva as he threw her onto the nearest wall while spinning like a professional wrestler. Airless, she fell directly to the ground, unconscious. The wall in front of Mineta was too large for him to stand on his own. It was a well-known obstacle called Mirio, he said in a dry, hoarse voice, struggling to stay conscious. His abilities were no laughing matter, and he was regarded as the strongest of the big three. He was allegedly in a favorable position and was unharmed by the two. "Yo," he exclaimed joyfully, "when you use your quirk, think of more creative ways of applying it in traps. Luckily, I have experience with things like these." "That's inside his brain," Mineta said. Despite his extremely perverted personality, he swallowed his pride and took the advice because, at the very least, he wanted to improve as a hero. Mineta lost consciousness, her body limp on the ground, with no chance of recovery. With joy, Mirio searched the closest building for his next target. He was in his battle mode, and could not be stopped. The students were putting their all into the battle royale, which was full of fights and traps. Nobody was making a pathetic effort. Everybody wanted to prevail in the battle. The same was true for Izuku and Nejire, who continued to cut and run, capturing one group at a time. Of course, they had the advantage, but it wasn't easy. After all, she was one of the big three and a third year. Nejire and Izuku arrived at one of the arena's high points after fleeing one of the fight scenes, searching for any potential attack from the front, back, or even below. I wonder how many are left. Izuku exhaled, his shirt sticking to his body in an uncomfortable waterfall of sweat. Not many, I guess, Nejire replied, not as exhausted as he was. They had defeated Koji and Denki's group in combat. They frequently had to avoid Kaminari's attacks, which used up a lot of their energy. That location didn't appear to be particularly vulnerable, so they made the decision to take a short break. But since every student in that class was actually a possible danger, they were unable to refrain from being irresponsible. Nejire called Izuku in a low voice so as not to draw too much attention. He asked, keeping his gaze fixed below them and his ears alert for any potentially harmful sounds. Why do you want to become a hero? I'm really curious. That was unexpected, so he was a little perplexed. I just saw you really giving your all without any shred of hesitation. That intrigued me. Well, he stumbled to finish. He fumbled his hands together and said, I really admired heroes when I was younger. As much as I do now, of course. He paused, still keeping watch over the area, and said, I really want to become a hero, save those in need. Can you help the things your heart long for? Is what Shinso told me after the sports festival. That's, she said, pausing briefly before leaping at Izuku and snatching him. Quote? The young boy was taken aback when she suddenly wrapped her arms around him, and in an instant, they were in the air. Nejire's shockwaves utterly destroyed the location they had been at before. Izuku understood that they were being attacked without much thought, so he repositioned himself to be able to identify the assailant. Ice. The building's voids gave way to a massive mountain of ice that quickly formed a path toward them. A pair of figures skimmed over the developing bridge. The face of the person who had made that path was not necessary for Izuku to see. Izuku told the laser-focused Nejire, Todoroki. Recalling the groups that were established the day before the battle royale, she replied, and Yaoyorozu as well. Needless to say, it would be a difficult confrontation. Fights with other groups had already worn them out, and they were even disturbed while they were sleeping. They were in a dire situation. Todoroki, a machine gun, started strafing them with ice shards. He started hitting them both, leaving them with no time to think. Ga! A single fragment tore through the atmosphere and sped in Izuku's direction, striking his hand. He started to tumble after losing his equilibrium and poise. Izuku repeatedly fell until he hit the ground after tripping over one of the almost endless pipes that crossed the field. Luckily, he was able to fall without suffering any fatal injuries. But that didn't change the fact that he was in excruciating pain. He started breathing frantically in an attempt to hold on to his conscience. Izuku glanced at his injured hand, which was blue and numb and covered in a thick layer of ice, making it unfit for combat. He had no choice but to get up and go into hiding. He needed to locate Nejire and carry out their strategy of capturing successive groups. He kept running while attempting to blend in with the darkness. I must run. I must locate Nejire. I fear that I will discover other groups. Like the chime of a clock, those thoughts pounded his mind over and over. He had to move forward despite his mind being a chaotic whirlpool of anxieties and fears. He arrived at a closed area with a higher pipe density one step at a time. He had been tracking the direction from which he sensed shock waves. In the assignment, no one else had a peculiarity like hers. Jiro was the closest with her sound waves, but Izuku suspected it was Nejire. Gotchan. The buildings on top of Izuku started to get hit by ice. Even though they weren't pointed directly at him, they were still too near. Analyzing the situation, he moved away from the ice that rained down from above. Together with Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, Nejire had collapsed to the ground and they started attacking her. Since they had never performed as a duo, they weren't exactly in sync, but they were still able to execute some combos. While Yaoyorozu was developing long-range weapons to use against Nejire, who was not having it easy, Todoroki was on the front lines. Despite being one of the big three and in her third year, she started to falter due to the terrain, being cornered, and her fatigue. Seeing that, Izuku braced himself. He indicated the ground beneath his feet with a flick of his finger. cannonballed forward, his body traveled across the air at a car's speed. He moved around in midair and honed in on the closest individual. In the middle of that action, his hands gripped the clothing of the person he couldn't even see. Izuku yelled, "Nejire, take care of the other one, ga." As he pulled the victim he had captured several meters before they clashed inside a closed building. The abrupt impact of Izuku's flight rumbled through the building and the ground. He had struck whoever he had captured body first against the inner wall. He was momentarily stunned and helpless. He had to make himself get to his feet and battle the person he had apprehended. He heard someone say, "You," from the interior of that building, which was dark. It was quiet but alert, hard and cold. However, Izuku became aware of the warning sign he had crossed. There was silence for a while. He was in a ready-to-attack pose with his guard up. He needed to figure out how to fight in the dark against one of his strongest opponents because he hadn't mastered one for all enough to avoid hurting himself. Todoroki. Izuku was exhausted. He breathed erratically and raggedly. The perspiration soaked him as he braced himself for what lay ahead. In the darkness of that building, he could make out the faint outline of Todoroki. Despite the web of cracks they created when they crashed into the building's inner wall, they were in a small area with nearly black shadows. Hour felt seconds had passed. Izuku had little time to consider the situation, but he was alert for any unexpected movement from Todoroki, who stood up quietly in the shadows. If he wanted to win, he needed to gain that time. Scree! Wow! Ga! Izuku screamed in agony, but the walls of the building muffled it. Before he could do anything, he had stepped back and flicked Todoroki. The best course of action was to act right away because there was no time for needless waiting. Izuku had no choice but to do so. His flick created a pseudo-spear of air that shot toward Todoroki at the speed of a missile. He was able to dodge the incoming burst of air by a haywire, though, and thrust himself with ice in time. At last, the air burst through the wall behind him, leaving a hole large enough to partially illuminate the area. Todoroki nearly struck his side against the wall, but an arch of ice was able to deflect the blow. He used his momentum to follow the narrow ice path until he finally hit the ground with a loud slam, landing on the chilly cement but quickly gathering himself. He scowled at Izuku as he readied his next move. Why doesn't Todoroki launch an attack? With a great deal of anxiety, Izuku's mind kept asking that question. With so little information, he was unable to anticipate Todoroki's next move. He had no idea how to use his quirk safely, and he knew very little about fighting. He was obviously exhausted from all of their fights, and the constant running he had to do completely sapped his energy. The use of his quirk, including the one he had just used on Todoroki, had also burned and broken 4 of his fingers. Todoroki called out, "Midoriya," amid the tense atmosphere. With concern, attention, and curiosity, Midoriya responded, "What?" "I won't hold back," he said simply, but there was a range of emotions in his voice, from thankfulness to a bitterness that Izuku was unable to fully express. But he sensed one thing from that resentment. It was aimed at him. "Me neither," was the only answer Izuku could have given. Why would he devote so much of himself to his dream if he didn't? For what reason would he waste over a year of his life? Simple words were used to exchange those emotions. They both prepared for a fight that never seemed to start because they were in a difficult situation. A tiny portion of Izuku's freshly constructed debris fell to the ground with a bang, as though it were the tiny spark that started a bonfire and broke the stillness. The terse words became deeds as they started fighting silently. Todoroki threw jagged pieces of flaming ice at Izuku, who quickly sidestepped it in a last-ditch waltz. Todoroki clearly had the advantage, but Izuku was unwilling to concede the point. When he eventually made a safe landing, he saw that Todoroki was getting ready for his next move. Scree bam! With the aid of his ice, Todoroki leapt to the side as another spear of air blazed in his direction. Izuku took advantage of Todoroki's momentum and scree bam! Gwe! Izuku managed to hit Todoroki once with those 2 consecutive shots, sending him flying like a javelin in the direction of the hole that illuminated the room before he fell to the ground outside the building. Before he stopped, he rolled 2 or 3 times. Izuku, however, was unable to use one hand effectively because he had used up 6 fingers. He suppressed that agonizing scream of pain by biting his lips. In order to continue fighting, he left the building. Because of his intense training during his sad childhood and the frequent beatings he received from his father, Todoroki quickly composed himself and turned to face Izuku. Before the action resumed, their determined eyes gleamed. But this time, Todoroki's left side erupted in a stream of fire, casting a magma-red glow over the innumerable pipes and tubes that encircled them. Fire twirled back and forth, inciting the violent nature of the Izuku. Izuku was reminded of their fight at the sports festival by the crackling of flames and the sickening stench of sulfur. Even if he succeeded in saving Todoroki, he was defeated. No matter how many fingers, bones, and muscles he broke, he would never allow Todoroki to win again. He didn't care that the assignment offered no tangible benefits beyond grades. He needed to establish himself in front of his classmates, teachers, mother, All Might, and the big three who kept an eye on his class. Izuku didn't have to speak. One for All zaps the air with a constant crepitation as it courses through his legs in an electric current. That was his only choice because he lacked the ability to use his quirk throughout his entire body. His body was nearly at its limit, and he had no strength left to do anything else. This would be his last battle to prevail. In contrast, Todoroki simultaneously froze and burned. He was surrounded by a crisscross of hard edges of flames, and his body ejected the freezing vapor of ice. The left side of his clothes started to crumble and ice poured out from his feet. WRAAAAAAAAAHHH. They both cried out. Even though their bodies were screaming in agony and trying to find a way to stop, they were powerless to stop the two unbreakable wills that were ordering them. Bruva. As he approached Todoroki by the nanosecond, Izuku jumped and tore the oxygen around him in a final conflict of emotions and motivations. His legs were broken, useless, and completely burned. The high speed of the air that slapped Izuku's body repeatedly caused them to crack and wobble. Instead of doing what he did at the sports festival, Todoroki made the thickest wall of ice he could and melted it with a fire that was kept at a controlled temperature, producing an opaque smokescreen of vapor. Izuku wasn't prepared for his body to crash into the ice, shattering it and shattering himself. His momentum was all that was left of his strength, which had completely vanished. Scree bam. Gui hh. However, he flicked his broken finger at Todoroki in the final protest before he hit the ground, using what last strength he had left from the endorphins and adrenaline coursing through his body. When Izuku finally hit the ground, he rolled innumerable times before colliding stomach first with a wall. But Todoroki was unable to avoid his smash because it was too quick and unpredictable. It slammed one of his legs, sending him spinning face first to the ground. However, Todoroki was able to shield his fall by putting his arms over his face. Only one leg could be lost by him. He was still able to think and have a conscience, but he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to fight. Izuku, on the other hand, was like a rock even after crashing stomach first into a wall. To the relief of the teachers, he continued to breathe. Todoroki had triumphed in yet another battle. Perhaps in that manner. Will she notice me? Will she notice me? That thought kept returning to Todoroki's mind. Ever since he spoke to her for the first time, it had been consuming his thoughts. Every now and then he would catch his gaze straying toward her. He had no idea when or why it began, and it was subtle. He only deduced that she had something he wanted, albeit subliminally. He therefore made a special effort to question the individual in question about everything, but as he approached her, his body refused to listen. Perspiration trickled down from his forehead, his knees became weak, and his throat clobbered with every final step. It was oppressive. The closeness to her was oppressive. The only theory he could think of was that she had a nectar-sweet venom that would draw him perfectly to a trap, but it was too fanciful. He dismissed that. Nevertheless, his curiosity grew as time swiftly went by. That made him look for whatever had been creeping into his head. He found his goal after a comparatively brief search, but he didn't really believe it because the information he discovered suggested otherwise. Love. He was unfamiliar with the weight and practical meaning of that word. Endeavor wasn't a good father figure, and Todoroki didn't even have crusts of love. When his father saw Todoroki, he was filled with rage, anger at the power of All Might. The pro-hero never once showed concern for the boy, as a good father should, or even glanced at him. He served only as an additional instrument to outshine All Might. Other times, Endeavor attempted to develop a flawless representation of his ideal of defeating All Might, but each attempt was unsuccessful and left things unfinished. However, Endeavor's descent into insanity continued after his wife gave birth to Todoroki. A successful product at last. Item. Shoto was not and never was his son. Nevertheless, Todoroki's love was for someone he didn't even have appropriate contact with. Why is that? He asked himself this innumerable times, but each time he came to the same conclusion: I don't know. But the response arrived without rapping on the door. One day, Todoroki recalled a straightforward experience from his early years. Years before UA, it was a hot day. To be honest, he was bothered by the steamy air that stung his face. Ever since he saw what Endeavor was doing, he detested hot things. He continued to murmur inaudibly as he walked along the roads that ran alongside the beach, discussing everything from his personal problems to his family's problems. Sincerely and rationally, he held his father responsible for everything his mother had endured. Her pent-up stress had landed her in the hospital. She'd applied it to Todoroki. The damage that man's ambition had caused was evident in his left eye. After being sold to an unidentified man, his mother gave birth to children with him and had to watch as the same man abused and neglected them. Who wouldn't blow up in the end? A ticking time bomb. She was just waiting to be set off. Todoroki just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. No matter what he did, that tragedy would never leave his body, mind, or soul. It was a curse that would never go away. He would be reminded of the irreversible harm to his and his family's lives until the end of his time on this planet. To forget his grief, he had to push all of those things to the back of his mind and value the things he had right now. He walked slowly and with a heavy heart, admiring the beach. He reasoned that the sun was warmer and kinder than Endeavor's hands, so it wasn't all that bad. No amount of bravery or fire can soften a person's icy heart, even if they are covered in flames. Why is all of this taking place? What causes my mother to cry at night? What makes that man my dad? Why am I present? Plop. With a silent plop, a single tear slowly rolled down his cheek and landed on the cement road. He quietly halted his steps and stared at the ground. It was hardly perceptible, but his body trembled on its base. Todoroki's body language wasn't as strong as other people's because he struggled to communicate his feelings. His nose-sized hair covered his eyes, concealing any interaction with the outside world. Todoroki was left alone. His heart was imprisoned in a prison of melancholy and dark feelings. His hands were shaking and his teeth were clenched as he muttered, "It's cold." He thought the sunflowers were blue and the sun was ice. On that chilly, hot day, the sky was dark and gray. There was silence. There were no cars circling to cause his mind to buzz wildly. Only he and the emptiness of melancholy were there. He was encircled by an endless darkness. Anguish was all that was left. There was no hope. A voice came from the shadows. It sounded like, distinct. Only when his mother spoke to him did he recall hearing a voice like that, full of worry. He nearly experienced nostalgia because it had been so long ago. It was very difficult to take action because his mother was not around him following the incident. He was startled out of his reverie by the voice. At last, he raised his head from his grief and gave the person who had spoken to him a quick glance. It was a female. Due to his terrible upbringing, Todoroki didn't interact with them very often. There is no time for rest. Training is done morning, evening, and night. Her eyes were obsidian, and her hair was raven black. She wore plain, stampless white clothes and had her hair pulled back in a spiky ponytail. Quote. Are you okay? Quote. Question mark. Quote. Todoroki couldn't understand. Why should he care about someone he didn't even know? It was absurd, strange, and unthinkable. He was unable to fully understand its meaning. Is he being singled out because he is the son of Endeavor? He was unaware. It's because, here it is, he would better understand the girl's logic after hearing her out. He wanted to know what it was. He would undoubtedly assist someone in need, but he wouldn't make an extra effort to interfere with someone's personal affairs. You're crying. Quote. Quote. What? Todoroki's eyes were wet with tears when he touched the hem of them. His expression remained the same and his face was not twisted. But why had he cried? He was always the type to keep things to himself and avoid talking to others about his personal issues. But why had he cried? Why is she concerned? Why? He kept asking himself the same question over and over again. Why? Why do you care? Even though it was a rude, impersonal, and abrupt response, it kept coming back to him. It was the source of all his thoughts. It was too much for him. He needed to remove it from his body. Pity. She still wore that worried expression in spite of everything. It refused to cling to her. Did she feel sorry for him? Pity. Is that it? It could not be explained in any other way. His mother, who wasn't even with him, was the only one who genuinely cared about him. Todoroki didn't follow the rules. He had no idea what it was. His father never taught him that, and the mother who would have done so was long since gone, living in a place where crazy people congregate. No, 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 she vehemently objected. She collected her thoughts and said, "Well, I know you don't know me, and I don't know you, but someone I didn't know as well told me that I should move forward, try to do something about the situation I was in. Because of a silly advice, I was able to fix myself." She let out a sigh and looked him in the eyes. "You may not listen to me, a stranger, but you can always take a step forward, even if times are rough." His nostrils were now tickled by the scent of water and salt. The sunflowers turned yellow at every sentence and period, and for some reason, every word she spit out caused the ice sun to melt a little more. "I don't know if it's some sort of payment for what he told me, or if it is simply my desire, but here I am, helping you, someone I don't even know." Tears streamed down Todoroki's cheeks and onto the sand beneath his feet as he looked at her. An unknown individual, an absolute stranger. She did not ignore his feelings, though, as she stood there and looked him in the eyes. He didn't know her, but that didn't matter. He was grateful for it. However, there are some things that words alone cannot change. Who knew he would be influenced by the same boy who influenced the girl with the raven hair? But he couldn't forget what she said. They had also been there for him when he wanted to die, when all he wanted to do was get out of his house. Simply move forward one more step. "What is your name?" He yearned for a response. The girl who squandered time to assist him had to be identified. The matter could not be dismissed. There was a flicker of curiosity in his heterochromatic brown and blue eyes, despite his curiosity, emotionlessness, and lack of body language. And she grinned without hurry or tension. "My name is Raven." Nejire didn't think Izuku would save the day. He had suddenly thrown himself, snatching Todoroki from combat. He made it possible for her to fight properly without worrying about being attacked by two people at once. But even though Todoroki, her greatest threat, was eliminated, it wouldn't make up for her lack of sleep. That was further demonstrated by her slow movements and labored breathing. "Nejire," Momo said with a deeper meaning that Nejire was unable to decipher. "I will not go easy on you." "Neither will I," she said, but still. The two girls readied themselves for indisputable battle. Nejire inhaled and exhaled, holding on to whatever peace and relaxation she could find before engaging in combat. She was able to transform vitality into shockwaves thanks to her quirk, but fatigue threatened to overshadow her lack of sleep. In contrast, Momo's eyes were fixed on Nejire's. Her normally round, vivacious face took on an uncanny shade of seriousness. As the two girls silently took their positions, the battlefield was covered in the pungent odor of rust. The arena was filled with a dense atmosphere. The signal came from a bird in the sky. Momo kicked the ground with a tremendous amount of strength that was not natural. No, she would not allow an outsider, Nejire, to approach her goal. Why should she give up to her when she had done so much more in that area? With each step, Momo's stride grew stronger. As she used her quirk, a mound of unspoken resentment clawed up her throat. Over the years, those hurtful remarks had tainted her thoughts, keeping her bound by doubt. However, Nejire was unable to comprehend the cause of her rage, but that didn't stop her from fighting back. Shrewdly, her quirk came into play with a bang. Her body was suddenly hurled above Momo and landed directly behind her. She used her momentum to kick her. But Momo was quicker. A wooden staff completed its creation with a flick of her wrist. She turned and blocked Nejire's kick before it hit. Action and resentment boiled in her veins. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline pumping with each beat. In all her life, she had never felt this way. The normally composed Momo was annoyed by Nejire's naive expression. How could she be unaware? She swung the staff with a force she didn't know she had, using her newly discovered sentiment. Nejire used a strategically placed shockwave to deflect the incoming blow. The staff rolled on the ground several times, far away from them, after rotating in the air, but Momo wasn't prepared for that fast response. But she wasn't going to stop there. Momo managed to throw Nejire off balance by grabbing her hanging leg through an opening, using her weight to do so, and landing on her back. Momo used her arms and legs to keep Nejire at bay. "Why?" she said, her voice breaking. She was unable to control it. Nejire was completely perplexed. She was about to employ her peculiarity when. "Why him? He? Who was she referring to? I don't." Momo cut in, You don't understand. Yes. Out of every student in school, why him? You have enough influence to get yourself any boy you want. Izuku Midoriya, Momo said bitterly, her face obscured by shadows and hair. Quote exclamation mark quote. Oh, finally, she got it. Why was Momo so hostile, and why did she feel like she was being stared at all the time in class? Everything made sense. Momo felt envious. She would be hostile, of course. Everyone experiences jealousy, even those who are the most virtuous. This is especially true when it comes to love. Nejire was only able to acknowledge that she felt something for Midoriya, even referring to it as love, in the heat of the moment. Yet such sour words and bitter glares were motivated by the same pleasant feeling. Anyway, what is love? Nejire asked herself. Time didn't seem to be moving, she was alone with her thoughts. She had read the textbook definition of love countless times. Love is a strong feeling of affection for somebody that you are sexually attracted to. But despite her best efforts, she was unable to comprehend it. That led to a lifetime of curiosity that continued to grow year after year. But knowing Midoriya, that unassuming, unsure, and occasionally frail person, did something to her that she couldn't have predicted, it satisfied her lifelong curiosity. It was a cozy, occasionally uncomfortable sensation. Even though there was no apparent reason, it constantly seeped into her body when she was around him. She was constantly distracted in class. For entire minutes, her eyes remained fixed on the same green-haired spot. However, he never seemed to notice those things, as if his unexpected intelligence was limited to battles, superheroes, and quirks. When she was close to him, her normal curiosity soared. If it were about him, things she would typically overlook, because there were simply so many more fascinating things, were of utmost importance. Why would I inquire about his favorite dish? As she considered asking, the thought kept coming to her mind repeatedly. But Momo also had feelings for that same boy. She became so envious that she was unable to control it due to her ignorance and confusion. Nejire would claim that she has never experienced jealousy, but she remembered that nursery scene. She had protected him from Uraraka without realizing it. It made absolutely no sense at the time, but after giving it some more thought. Jealousy was the cause. Her mind experienced a massive surge of realization as the disparate bits of knowledge and memories came together. She recognized her. She was the same, after all. Yaoyorozu. What? Momo continued to press her to the ground. I'm the same as you, Nejire said as the ground rumbled under her resistance to Momo's hold. Quote exclamation mark quote. And I will not hand him over. Bang. Momo rolled on the ground repeatedly after being flung across the battlefield. She stopped before she struck any structure. Her legs hardly allowed her to stand, dazed. Her surroundings swirled, and her vision was fuzzy. A viscous, warm fluid poured from her. Nejire's breath came in short gasps. Her emotional outburst caused her to overdo it. She collapsed to her knees, fighting to keep her eyes open. No. Remaining energy. In addition to fighting Yaoyorozu, Nejire had expended all of her energy flying, battling other people, and working with Izuku. The icing on the cake was that last blast. It would undoubtedly be a one-sided battle if they were fighting in a normal setting and controlled their emotions. Nejire would triumph easily, but those circumstances weren't typical. It was not a skill-based battle. It was an emotional conflict. It wasn't over, though. The real war was only getting started. You poor soul, Izuku. You have no idea what's going to happen. The building of UA was bathed in a warm yellow hue. Every living thing in the vicinity of the massive campus was covered by the sun. There was a welcoming vibe throughout the school, from marching ants to the tiny creatures in the neighboring forest. An incredibly familiar blue hair bobbed along a soft humming as it followed through the well-paved roads that led the students to their daily routine and along the entrance of the prestigious school. As it moved through the gray but vibrant hallways, the gentle voice continued to play its tune cheerfully. Hum hum. She strode to a flight of stairs, occasionally catching glimpses of enormous doors. She was holding a white box with a fabric with a flower pattern on it. It swayed with her especially bouncy steps. She joyfully followed the path to the bottom of the stairs, occasionally avoiding them. She excitedly raised the tiny container in her hands and exclaimed, "Can't wait. What will he think about this, She continued walking until she came to a large white door. Although she hesitated for a moment, the door slid smoothly. As she stepped into the white room, her humming ceased. She could see a few curtains-covered beds, a white table in the corner of the room with an empty gray chair next to it, and innumerable medicine bottles. She turned to see a few curtains closed, indicating that the beds were occupied. The vast majority of the beds were occupied, which is not surprising. As she made her way to the first curtain to close, she muttered to herself, "A lot of people were knocked out, huh? Mirio's overdone it again." The thickness of those curtains prevented even a faint outline of anything inside, concealing whoever was inside. The pristine white of the fabric was the only image visible to her from the outside. She peered through nearly every curtain before arriving at a particular bed in the room's corner. With a gentle grip on the curtains, she glanced over and saw a boy sleeping soundly. He writhed with bandaged hands and gauze on his cheeks. He was wearing a ripped and scratched PE uniform. The boy's little face was suddenly engulfed in a ray of light that swept across the room through an outside window. With little more time to wait, she cautiously and quietly sat down in a chair next to the bed. The boy's appearance drew her attention. The first thing she saw was his typically soft face covered in scratches. She set the little box on a table close to her and watched in silence. His gouged face drew her fingers, which followed his cheeks, jawline, and then his gentle, albeit blood-stained, mouth. But instead of approaching, she dared only observe his gentle breathing. She returned her attention to his hair. She started to carefully and tenderly ruffle it after feeling that unexpected softness on the tips of her fingers. She continued to caress the unconscious boy, oblivious to her surroundings. Her curiosity was sated to the brim as her gaze moved over his body. Despite being close to him frequently, even sharing the seat next to his desk, she had never been able to look him in the eye. Nevertheless, that joy was fleeting. Without noticing the room around him, the boy's eyes opened gently. She removed her hands from him and saw the boy sitting up a little lightheaded. As he stretched, his low voice reverberated throughout the silent room. "Where?" "Shish," he heard a barely audible whisper that caught his attention. "Nejire," he exclaimed, his eyes wide. Here to see how you're doing after, the assignment," she said, fumbling with her fingers. He scratched the back of his head and said, "Oh, thank you." No, she said with a headshake. "Thank you for bringing Todoroki out back then, even though, well, we didn't win," she thought for a moment. Nodding, Izuku said, "I see." He turned away, his cheeks blushing a little. "No problem, it happens a lot, and you were quite tired as well," he said. Doesn't your quirk work by transforming vitality into shockwaves?" Izuku's remark startled Nejire. He lowered his voice with each word. "Well, I like to take notes of." His final words, people I think are cool heroes, like you," were barely audible to Nejire, but her peachy cheeks and wavy mouth were enough to make Izuku stop talking and cover his face with a pillow. His voice was muffled by the pillow. "Soeb bejiwe." No problem. She began massaging her own cheeks in an attempt to remove any traces. The warm and inviting atmosphere made the fact that they had lost the assignment seem insignificant. The embarrassed couple was once again bathed in light from that warm sun. But then they heard a familiar whisper, Nejire. Together. Izuku peered from the pillow and asked, "Why yaoyosu?" She pretended to smile amiably at Nejire, asking, "What are you doing here?" Nejire picked up the box wrapped in a floral cloth and said, "Just checking up on Midoriya. I even made this for him." Midoriya continued to hide behind the pillow, unable to comprehend the entire scene that was taking place in front of him. Momo said, "A bento, huh?" before leaving the curtains and coming back holding a huge black box with golden designs. She grinned, but her eyes didn't follow. "I think he would prefer this much more. It was made by a 5-star chef, after all," she said. He wriggled the pillow against his face while attempting to be quiet. "He's not going to eat that mountain," she exclaimed as she got to her feet, her bento in hand. "Mine even has katsudon." Kachu. He stopped muffling. She gave the hidden Izuku a gentle glance before a shade of rose appeared on her cheeks, saying, "But I doubt Izuku has ever tasted a 5-star filet mignon, right?" She was struck by Izuku's shyness. No. He put the pillow down and shook his head. Then. "No, he'll eat my bento," Nejire scowled at Momo impatiently. Without hesitation, Momo returned the glare. No, dear, he'll eat mine," she said. Izuku was paralyzed by fear as sparks flew across the room. For what reason were they discussing feeding him? And why did they want to do it so much? Those things were too big for his head. "So, Midoriya," they said, both of them turning to face him. They were staring at the poor boy and asked, "Which one?" He writhed, as bewildered as he had never been before. Huh. As they approached the poor boy, they each offered him a bento. "Which one will you eat?" they asked. He glanced at each bento rapidly as his eyes moved from side to side. He said in a hardly audible voice. "Be both." He shook his hands frantically. He did not wish to be perceived as a glutton. I needed a big appetite in order to gain mass and train in order to become a hero, so I can eat both," he said. "Ah, I see." Momo and Nejire looked at each other. "You hear me? This isn't over yet." A sight for weary eyes was the pickling of the sand, the powerful yet tender Japanese sun, and the soothing sound of the waves. The warm cold sea breeze ruffled Izuku's already disheveled hair as he allowed his feet to sink to the bottom of the prickle sand and felt it between his toes. He grinned. He was reminded of his mother and how much she enjoyed smothering him in hugs whenever he returned home by the lukewarm embraces of the sand. He cherished the sensation of safety and envelopment. Kaminari gave him a playful pat on the back and asked, "Izuku is here already?" "Hey Kaminari." Izuku ruffled his own hair, trying in vain to do what he was unable to do. "I live just near here." He approached the deep blue water and said, "You live near the sea, how nice." "Oh yeah, this is the beach that was covered in trash not too long ago, right? Whoever cleaned it did a big favor to the city." Izuku's eyes wandered far as he recalled the searing pain he experienced every day while training with All Might. "Why yeah, it should have been really hard," he said. "Still, it was worthwhile." "They are already here," exclaimed Zero as Mineta walked next to him. With drool streaming from his mouth, the grape-haired pervert continued to scan the beach, concentrating on every girl he could find. "I love swimsuits. The way they accentuate the perfect roundness of women's breasts and how they don't get in the way of those plumpy, shiny, luscious Suyu used her tongue to cut Mineta's neck, saying, "I'll have to stop you right there." With the same excited look, he collapsed on the sand and passed out. The beach started to flood in the remaining Class -1A areas. Bakugo didn't appear to be as hostile when he was there either. Toru's clothes bubbled in the air as she said, "Nice place, isn't it? I'm glad they let us have a week off after all the things we had to do." Indeed, Todoroki fixed his gaze on the warm, golden sun. Occasionally, he would recall a time when everything was blue and gelid, when he detested all things warm. The corners of his mouth slightly, almost imperceptibly, lifted. As the people responsible for bringing the necessary items for the previously scheduled barbecue began to set up the area, he turned to see an increasing number of classmates starting to show up. They were able to locate a decent beachfront rental property, an open space that had everything they needed for the barbecue. Izuku, exhausted from working too much over the last few weeks, stretched his arms across the long, sharp wooden table and sat down on one of the room's two large benches. The girls wore clothes over their swimsuits, waiting for everyone to arrive so they could swim, while the majority of the boys wore only their trunks and no shirts, and his eyes continued to glide through his classmates, softly observing them. For the boys, Izuku, Todoroki, and the unyielding Bakugo were the only exceptions. "What time will the big three show up? Have you seen Yaomomo, too? The only ones missing are them." Izuku heard Mina ask that question. Uraraka replied, "Yaomomo texted me earlier stating that she would arrive a little later, but I'm not sure about the big three." "I see. Perhaps she's getting ready for someone in her swimsuit." Uraraka cooed, "Ooh, but who do you think is her target?" "Who knows? Maybe she isn't after all. We'll only know when she arrives." Mina laughed. "I'm also really curious for Nejire. She's popular for a reason." Uraraka joyfully skipped, "Definitely. I'll ask her some beauty tips later as well." Izuku moved his seat on the wooden bench, and both girls went to speak with Suyu. Nejire in a bathing suit. His mind flashed to her in a bikini. Her hair flowed beautifully in the wind, and her bikini, which was tight around her body, was the only thing that emphasized her model figure. Izuku let out a silent cry, "Eek!" and gently slammed his head against the table. He was unable to do something as obscene as picturing her in a bikini, something as erotic as picturing every curve. Izuku hid his nervous face. He was unable to show off his flushed and warm cheeks. For him, it would be too much. No, 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 no. I promise I'm not a pervert. He heard a car revving before he could finish his apologetic monologue. He noticed a white convertible car peeking through his hands. As the driver parked, a girl sat in the passenger seat. Yaoyorozu. She got out of the car and skipped to the beach. She had a dazzling smile on her face. As she approached their classmates, his once rosy cheeks became flaming. Her clothing, though simple, was sufficient to silence the naive boy. It was absolutely stunning to see the subtle outline of a black bikini against the nearly transparent white hoodie that didn't attempt to cover up her voluptuous figure. She bowed courteously. "Sorry, I'm late," oblivious to the damaging potential of the tiny space between the bikini and the hoodie. Fortunately, Mineta was unconscious, her face buried in the sand. "Stop worrying," Mina shrugged. "By the way, do you always dress up like this to the beach?" She fumbled with her fingers. Not really. Just wanted to try something different." Mina picked it up right away, but she chose not to make fun of her just yet. An irritated voice exclaimed, "Rio, I told you we shouldn't go through that shortcut. Look, we're late." He clasped his hands together and said, "Sorry, Nejire." Tamaki simply stared at them, irritated by their excessively loud voices. At last, the trio arrived at the shore. Casting his gaze to the floor, Tamaki apologized. "Sorry, we're late." "You know these two?" Nejire and Mirio both said, "Sorry," simultaneously. "It's fine." Toru's garments bobbed in the air. "You're not that late." Mina nodded. Izuku calmed down and went to his classmates, but it didn't stop a little patch of rosiness from remaining. He scratched his cheeks in an attempt to hide his warm face. Hey guys," he said. "Yo, Midoriya." Mirio put Izuku's head in a lock while teasingly ruffling his underclassman's wild green hair. Tamaki gave the scene a quick smile and nodded as the girls gathered around Nejire to offer advice. Yaoyorozu smiled placidly as he watched. In the end, Mirio turned on his quirk, allowing Izuku to pass through him and grinning broadly at the thought of enjoying himself with his temporary classmates. With tears in his eyes, Izuku rubbed his head and nearly fell to the sand. "That hurt, Mirio." The blonde said, "Sorry, not sorry," and vanished from the teasingly irritated Midoriya. "Geez." Midoriya started to look for Mirio when a tiny thud splattered the sand everywhere. "Pitiful, pitiful, oh how pitiful it is," Mineta exclaimed as he kicked the sand to wake up from his well-earned nap. One tongue slapped him across the face and said, "Why are you not in your certainly Arati, instead?" He said, rubbing his stinging cheek, "I mean, why are you hiding behind that huge white shirt? It's not even see-through," as he gestured to Nejire's clothing. Mina patted Suyu's back and said, "Don't mind him Nejire, he'll suffer a lot today if he keeps it up." "Hero," the frog girl exclaimed with an eager nod. "Don't worry," she glanced at Izuku in a flash. "It's just not the right time yet." But that brief moment was captured by the camera that Mina was looking at. Inside her eyes, a tiny flicker became an ember. "Nejire?" she asked, her smile growing as she walked up to the blue net. "I sense something really interesting." Uraraka used her quirk to pull Mina as she started to frantically flail her arms in the air, but to no avail. "Don't Mina, now's not the time for this." "I know, but," Mina was silenced by Uraraka's unusually severe expression. "Anyways, now that everyone is here, why won't we let the fun begin?" With a sidelong glance at Izuku, Todoroki said, "Don't you wanna go in, Midoriya?" He shifted in his seat and replied, I'm just resting a bit. Still kinda tired from the assignment." As the parasol shielded them from the eager sun and waved slightly in the ocean breeze, the two boys sat in their individual towels, feeling the brittleness of the sand kind of peek through the fabric. They observed their peers engaging in water sports, such as swimming, tossing, and Bakugo plunging straight into the waves. The girls were chatting about who knows what as they sat farther away from Izuku and Todoroki. With a yawn, Izuku collapsed onto his towel. "I'm taking a nap, kinda sleepy." Todoroki ignored the scenery and continued to stare at the waves as they crashed repeatedly, saying, A slight, imperceptible warmth crept up his cheeks. He couldn't stop thinking about Yaoyorozu ever since he got to the beach. Her simple yet incredibly adorable beach attire caught him off guard with emotions he had never experienced before. What am I doing wrong? The inexperienced boy had never seen her in a swimsuit and was totally unaccustomed to that sensation. Every time she was around him, he experienced a strangely pleasant uneasiness. He didn't know how to handle the situation because he had never given those things any thought in his life and only realized that the strange feeling he had when he was around Yaoyorozu was love, after entering UA. In conflict with the recent events, he looked at the sleeping Izuku. He was appreciative of Izuku, who provided the last push Todoroki needed to change and was the last thing that kept his gears turning. However, whenever Yaoyorozu came near him, he also experienced an unexplained, nauseating sensation that made his stomach turn. Although he had heard that word before, it lingered on the tip of his tongue and nearly fell out of his mouth. Again, what was it? When the person you like is close to someone else, you feel something. Every time someone you like is the object of affection, you feel something. Something that happens whenever you're not the object of love. It was a self-injecting poison that was green, sticky, poisonous, nauseating, and twisting. When Todoroki finally said the word, his eyes grew wide. Jealousy. Todoroki turned his resentful gaze to Izuku for a final time before getting up and moving to wherever he could go to get a good sense of his thoughts. As the beach was illuminated by the sun, Izuku's eyes gradually opened, but he was too sleepy to awaken. He closed his stunned eyes, his body settled comfortably on his towel, the softest pillow he had ever slept on, and he didn't want to wake up. A gentle sensation brushed his cheeks, following the lines of his unadorned face. It was safe and reassuring. He turned around and buried his face in the pillow, saying, Just 5 more minutes, he muttered, so soft, in a drowsy voice. As he spoke, the pillow shifted a little, and Izuku could feel the temperature rising. Shish, he sensed a warm, gentle hand stroking his hair. Izuku raised his head and made his eyes focus on his surroundings. Nejire, he asked, turning back. With her cheeks slightly flushed, the brunette giggled, wake up, sleepyhead. Good morning. It took Izuku a long time to realize what he was in. Nejire, he exclaimed, startled. What are you doing? She skipped to her feet and walked around him. Unable to contain her smile, she playfully grinned, just helping a tired soul. Was the lap pillow any good? In a desperate attempt to hide his own shame, Izuku put his hands over his face. Why yeah, he muttered, struggling to speak clearly. Nejire didn't care that they were in public, wasn't scared to make her own advances, and didn't know that Mineta and company were constantly giving Izuku knives in exchange for looks. Nejire, what are you doing with him? Yaoyorozu intervened because Izuku and the brunette were too intimate. As if on cue, Nejire said without hesitation, I was just making sure he wouldn't wake up with a sore neck. Just caring for a classmate, right? Who were you trying to fool? Izuku wanted to leave the place in sheer humiliation, but he made an effort to comprehend the circumstances. He wasn't stupid, but he couldn't imagine 2 girls fighting for him, so he instantly rejected the, they like me, that's why they're doing this, response. Why would that happen to him, of all people, when it didn't happen in real life? All Izuku could do was yell in shame. What are you weak? He said, wanting to turn around at what he saw. Grinning, Nejire reached for the hem of her opaque white shirt and carefully slid it off. I feel like swimming all of a sudden. The delicate summer breeze brushed against her immaculate, unkempt skin as the shirt dragged across it tenderly. It was similar to gradually peeling a fruit to reveal a sweet, succulent inside. Her strands of celestial blue hair fell upon her body, nearly merging with the blue smears that covered every inch of her pearl-white bikini. She threw the shirt on the towel, spun around in a circle, and came to a stop directly in front of Izuku. She looked at his halcyon green eyes with a hint of awe. He was the only audience, and she was the ballerina. Hee. Nejire delighted in the sight of Izuku's fiery red face. In one last challenge, she seized Izuku's arm and tightly wrapped her body around it, pressing her 2 joyful mounds onto the boiling broccoli in a sweep motion so swift the boy was helpless. Eek. He was no longer even able to construct complete sentences. How are you, Momo? Nejire already believed she had won. The raven, raging like a locomotive, was ready to explode. But if it meant, she would suffer public humiliation if she allowed Nejire to gain the upper hand. She swallowed any superfluous thoughts and moved forward. Yaoyorozu, sure that she wouldn't lose against Nejire, seized Izuku's other arm and pressed herself against it like a crow snatching its prey. When Izuku eventually snapped out of his reverie, he discovered that he was in the midst of a game of tug-of-war. That was as near an answer as he could find. Even though the idea repeatedly slammed his head, the boy angrily denied that they liked him. Izuku looked around, trying his hardest not to notice the 4 warm, soft, and incredibly comfortable mounds that supported his arms, but all he saw was the boy's envious gaze. Izuku overcame his own desires and took the only action he could to put an end to this battle. Conflict. He had no idea, but it didn't matter. He attempted to pull himself away, but both of their hands felt like they were attempting to seize a victim, stout and immobile. Since it would harm both him and them, he would not use his quirk. To be honest, he didn't really mind hurting himself because it had become a habit by that time. It was forbidden to use quirks outside of school. Gue! He cried in agony. Izuku was flung high into the air by a random, envious man who sent an approaching gust of wind out of the growing crowd. He tried to balance himself, but it didn't work as he spun around uncontrollably. His consciousness was nearly carried away with the waves as his ragdoll body struck the water with full force. He coughed up the water he had swallowed and swam back up in desperation. Since the water level he was in could reach his neck, he was still able to stand. He calmed down and swam back to the shores, arriving at the two anxious girls. While arguing, they were unaware of the crowd's constant growth. With bitterness, they both said, "Sorry." Izuku caught his breath, but he felt as though he was carrying a lot of weight. "Don't worry," he said. "Just a second, my clothes feel heavy." He reached for his shirt and pried it off as fast as he could, but it was so wet from the unwanted swim that it just dripped across his skin. He breathed wildly as he removed it, letting out a great sigh of relief. But Izuku had failed to notice the piercing eyes becoming dazed. He just focused on breathing until he was at ease. For a superhero, the boy's muscular physique was a given. Only those who lack it or are not combat-focused disregard it. However, that did not imply that women did not value that. Indeed, Nejire and Yaoyorozu simply gazed attentively at the weakly powerful boy. Would he be a sheep dressed like a wolf or a wolf dressed like a sheep? Izuku needed another second before he stood fully upright, exposing his muscles for everyone to see. Since it wouldn't help him to be embarrassed, he had become accustomed to having his male classmates stare at him while he changed, but it still felt strange to have more than two girls staring at him. He felt vulnerable, unclothed in public view. It was identical to the first time he had shown a piece of work to the class. Without giving the intent much thought, he felt as though those looks were daggers aimed at him. Izuku exclaimed, "Well, I'm not feeling so good bye," as he chanted his magic disappearing spell and ran away. Dazed, Nejire and Yaoyorozu continued to stare at his location. Even though Nejire had seen him topless before, it still had the same impact. Yaoyorozu, who had never seen him without a shirt, suffered double damage. Izuku then returned for the barbecue and began eating without making eye contact with the two girls. He spent the remainder of the day with a warm flush on his face. He would undoubtedly remember that day for a very long time. After a long day at school, Izuku collapsed on his bed. He didn't even try to keep his room tidy. He simply wanted to lie down, sink into his plush mattress, and find any comfort he could. The ever-increasing pain in his chest, however, was not eased by the comfort of his own bed. "Why is it so hard?" to himself he murmured. Izuku had been the source of contention between Nejire and Momo since they had returned from the beach a few days prior. For some reason Izuku could not understand, they would compete restlessly with one another. That's what he's been telling himself repeatedly, at least, ever since he had to eat 2 bentos at once, or ever since he dared to think about the possibility of falling in love. What ought I to do? Izuku had been the object of insults and ignorance since he was a child. At times, he had even wished he could just go home, cry, and forget about the class. Whenever someone glanced at him, it was either out of spite or sympathy. And Izuku eventually became scarred as a result of such things. He was unable to see himself as deserving of anything or as anything other than a stepping stone for those in positions of authority. The image of the scrawny middle schooler with repulsive freckles was all he saw when he looked in the mirror. A poor, helpless man's excuse. And over time, the sporadic self-loathing became so commonplace that it became the norm. He eventually stopped injuring himself because he was just plain, which was normal for him. Furthermore, his lack of self-love and confidence persisted despite his gradual increase in assertiveness and confidence during his time at UA. He had no idea how he would handle romance. He had never in his life imagined that anyone would show even the slightest interest in him. He had no idea, and the thought of this whole thing was painful. I'm not. His bed linens were clenched. Izuku had no idea why they liked him either. He lacked both a remarkable personality and good looks. All he had were All Might wallpapers and his ugly nerdy pastimes. Nevertheless, a miracle took place. Not just one, but 2 girls started to express even the smallest interest in him. His heart ached, crushed under its own weight. Any other boy would be ecstatic to learn that he was the object of a girl's love, but Izuku simply descended into a downward spiral of self-loathing. A hole from which he could not escape. He was a young child trapped in a well. Huddling in a corner and sobbing while he waited for help that would never arrive was all he could do. After a while, Izuku dozed off and slept through a restless night. The sound of Todoroki's punch bag reverberated throughout his home gym. His punches sounded like a disorganized orchestra's drums. Every chord in the decrescendo sounded like a pathetic whimper reverberating through a hollow theater. His ambivalent thoughts, a hesitant conductor attempting to harmonize two conflicting melodies, a tender gratitude and a gritted jealousy. Both came from Midoriya, which was also where Todoroki's conflict began. As warm as a field of sun-kissed daisies, his gratitude is accompanied by joyful violin notes, ignorant and naive. His jealousy was like a drum without a beat, waiting for a line that would never form, hopeless and bitter. He struggled against this fearsome tide of conflict, exerting all of his strength to halt, even for a split second, this barrage of sounds he was never ready to hear and of inexplicable feelings he could hardly comprehend. The maestro himself, however, was unable to harmonize the two songs. He punched that bag repeatedly until blood splattered onto the ground. This was the first time Todoroki had felt this way. He needed to think. He needed to know what he ought to do. Nor would he benefit from jabbing until he minced both hands. He needed to master his heart, that tumultuous group. What am I looking for? Both songs were stopped by the maestro. Should I keep her all to myself? The drummer, eager to play, strafed his drums as he raised one hand. But all that reverberated in confusion were booms and clacks. Do I wish to assist him in the same way that he assisted me? The violinist gently danced with the notes in warm, straightforward notes as he held up his other hand. But all he performed were naive tunes devoid of passion and fervor. He couldn't deny his jealousy because he would be deceiving himself. He couldn't ignore his gratitude because doing so would be the same as his father's brutality. I must have at last. Todoroki understood what he needed to do. He could hardly believe he was blind because it was so easy. The maestro's face lit up with a tiny, imperceptible smile as he slowly combined the soft violinist of his appreciation and the rough drummer of his jealousy into a single, special melody that only he could comprehend. Just as his own body was designed to control both fire and ice, two opposing forces that, of course, would never come into contact, it was his own method of doing things. Swift and calm, ferocious and gentle, flaming and cold. The song concluded with a final crescendo and a final punch. The maestro was satisfied. Todoroki was aware of his obligations. Green on white, chalk on board. Even though Aizawa's lessons were monotonous, she continued to instruct the students. Teaching wasn't something he detested. That was just the iron side of him. Hard, cold, and brassy. However, Izuku paid little attention to the teacher's instructions or any formula. He only did the bare minimum to avoid drawing attention to his unusual lack of focus because his mind was operating on autopilot. He didn't have a good night last night, nor was it as if he had a bad dream. All he wanted was to put an end to these thoughts and let them go. Never open the box again after placing them inside. He would only feel more burdened if he had to face Nejire or Yaoyorozu. He was unable to bring himself to meet their eyes. The adage, "eyes are the window to the soul," is true, but it's still true. Izuku lowered his head and continued to write. What? Although he was unsure at the moment, it was the only way he could escape these things, even if only briefly. Ringing. His classmates started to leave the classroom when the bell rang. Before long, he and a few students were alone. After packing his things, he left the classroom and entered the UA hallways. According to some, those hallways are a vast array of colors, teeming with the most bizarre eccentricities and a diverse array of individuals. Numerous characteristics, including wings, horns, blue, red, big, and small, made up this diverse and lovely school, which was portrayed with warm aspirations and golden dreams. Izuku was momentarily distracted from his own stormy, gloomy thoughts by this beauty. Hey, Midoriya. His shoulder was tapped. Hey, Todoroki. Is there a problem? I simply need to speak with you for a little while. Let's simply move to a less congested area. Sure. He trailed after Todoroki into a deserted corridor. He gave his head a scratch. What on earth could he need me for? Midoriya, do you understand what you've been doing lately? Todoroki's brows furrowed. What do you mean? He was still baffled by why all of this was happening. You've been leading Yaoyorozu on for a while, haven't you? You're exactly right. It was a slam that rang through his heart like the funeral bell of a church. What? Midoriya took a step back, his feet shaking. I knew it. Izuku was shaken even more by Todoroki's solemn expression, even though he was not angry. I'm positive you're not a bad person, Midoriya. What is the reason behind your actions? His hands fumbled wildly, looking for any semblance of solace he could find in that abrasive circumstance. Don't freak out. I won't murder you. All I want to do is talk. Calmly, he said. He took deep breaths and eventually relaxed. I just don't feel okay. Could you tell me why? I am unable to. I don't think I'm worthy of being in a relationship. I'm not as good as a lot of people. I apologize, but I just don't know. To some degree, Todoroki knew that. The only reason he was born, brought up, and trained was to surpass the one, to be superior to the one. However, the strength of All Might would surpass even the number of training hours and punches his gut would endure. And he was never happy with any of that. In every aspect, Todoroki was superior to the majority. When compared to his flawless genetics, brains, strength, and eccentricities were all irrelevant. And with some people's assistance, he realized that he needed to be true to himself in order to be happy. Regardless of his background, he could become a hero. Regardless of his left side, he could make his mother happy. It's your power, isn't it? Were you not telling me? Among these was Midoriya himself. He made the decision to support Todoroki whether he won or lost the fight. In an attempt to save himself and help him understand who he truly was, he repeatedly destroyed his own body. I get it, so I'll say it to you as well. However, he was in the same predicament as Todoroki some time before. He shared the same hardship and dire situation as someone who rejected a piece of his own self. It's your life, isn't it? Those words penetrated his soul like an arrow piercing its target. Midoriya felt hypocritical because he disregarded his own counsel, which All Might had given him when he was rescued from the slug monster. He didn't follow his own counsel. Click. A hypocrite. He told Todoroki all of those wonderful things, but he chose to ignore them. Click. A hypocrite. He did not take any action to transform himself. He simply gave up. Click. A hypocrite. He only accepted Deku as himself, rejecting all traces of Izuku Midoriya. Clack. Saying kind things but not doing anything to honor them is just another way to be dishonest and deceitful. If he wanted to become a hero and become himself, he had to take the first step. He had rejected himself and his eccentricity all these years. Without turning around, he tossed everything he owned into the trash. However, that was irrelevant. Midoriya realized he could change, just as Todoroki did when he accepted his despised left side and distanced himself from his own father's shadow. He was forced to. Thank you. He let a silent tear fall down his cheek. 2 words. It was a simple phrase that held great significance for him. Though he was never told he could become himself, he was told he could become a hero. He began to shift gears slowly but steadily. Todoroki's as well.
So this was the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.